My story is not about ghosts nor goblins, but something much worse. A man. Yes, a man who forced me to view humans from a totally different perspective. It's a long story, and I've never shared it with anyone, but I have mentioned it to my therapist, as this was a very traumatic experience. Even though this happened to me many years ago, it's important for me to give you as many details as possible, and a bit about myself. My name is Yvonne. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a female, Asian Hispanic. I know, lovely mix. At the time of this, I was in my 30s. I'm about 5'6" and weighed 130 pounds. Athletic, fair-skinned, and was also newly divorced. I had embraced my newfound freedom. I must warn you though, my experience can be triggering, as it contains many acts of violence, both domestic and sexual assault. So it's really up to you if you wish to proceed. Without further ado, I was going through a party phase, and my way of coping with life was by drinking and partying my life away. Yes, it temporarily numbed my emotions, but due to my selfish behavior, my young children suffered. I was young, but even then, I acted immature. I just wanted to have a good time. I wanted absolutely nothing serious with anyone. My recent divorce was hurting me so deeply, and when I liked someone, I would romance that person until they would be eating from my hand. But then, just like that, I wouldn't contact them again. But when someone showed too much interest in me, I did the very opposite. Yes, I pushed back harder. I had youth and beauty. I was in control, or so I thought. There was this very handsome man who was a friend of a friend's. This night, he happened to be the lucky one who apparently wanted more than to just dance the night away. As you may have guessed, I was most definitely pushing him back, but I had my reasons this time. The last time I had seen this guy, he made comments that made me dislike him even more. "You will be mine," he would jokingly tell me. I would respond flirtatiously yet joking. "Victor, it doesn't hurt to dream." I saw anger in the deep of his big brown eyes, but I promised myself he would get nothing but my pity, and I jokingly said, "I'd rather be dead." Victor replied in a firm voice, "That can be arranged," followed by laughter from him, but also everyone who was there at the party. They thought it was funny too. Then one of Victor's friends said, almost threateningly, "You know, Victor always gets what he wants." With my liquid courage out loud, I said, "I belong to no one, and just to be clear, I'm the one who does the picking and choosing." Feeling slutty, my friends laughed in agreement. Finally, party night had arrived. The plan was for the three couples to all go together, males and females paired respectively. But when I got picked up, to my dismay, guess who I'd been paired with? You guessed it, Victor, who also happened to be the person driving us in his brand new red truck. I knew it was a conspiracy, but I wasn't going to back down. I was ready for the challenge. We decided to go to a very fancy club, and Victor was being a total gentleman from what I could tell. The lights were bright, the music was bumping, and the alcohol was flowing. I felt alive. And tonight was all about me. I realized at one point that I needed to go to the ladies' room. It was there that I assessed my current situation and concluded that I would slow down on the drinking. It wasn't even midnight, and I could already feel the effects, which was odd, because not only was my head spinning, but I would feel terribly sleepy. I also didn't want to drink any more, so I could keep my composure and not do something I would regret. But I was feeling sleepy. There was a point where I almost thought I would fall asleep while standing by the sink washing my hands. At the time, I didn't even realize I hadn't finished up my Jack and Coke. This feeling was new, so now it was a matter of survival. I stormed out of the bathroom to find the girls I came with. I wanted to be near them in case I collapsed, but my steps were getting heavier, as were my eyelids. Then I realized the drink. As I stumbled into the crowd, barely keeping my eyes open, I saw Victor standing there with a grin on his face. He was tall at 6'2", 250 pounds, with brown hair and beautiful dreamy brown eyes. His teeth were perfectly white and straight. He was walking towards me, and as he got closer, I wanted to yell, "You drugged me, you coward!" Then I felt my legs give out, but I don't remember hitting the floor. I really don't know how long I was out. I opened my eyes to the humming of a ceiling fan and the cool air hitting my bare body. The first thought was to quickly sit up and find my clothes, but for the time being I couldn't move. I was able to move my eyes, but my entire body was numb. I began questioning myself. Who did I leave the club with? Where am I? Whose living room was I lying in? I wanted my clothes, but how could I find it if I couldn't even move my hands? Suddenly I heard footsteps and a familiar voice. "You awake?" It was Victor. How could he ask so calmly? I wanted to say many obscenities, but my voice wasn't cooperating. It was gone. I realized I was lying butt naked on my adversary's couch, when I realized he was also naked. No. How could this be happening? I was defenseless, pinned to the couch and unable to scream or run. I was Victor's prey, and he was going to have his way with me while holding me hostage. My own body had betrayed me. I was so thirsty, but I wanted nothing Victor had to offer. Sadly, I didn't have a choice, as he grabbed my hair and sat me up on the couch. He got a styrofoam cup and poured a bitter, clear liquid in my mouth, and at the same time he was holding a knife to the side of my throat and screamed at me to drink. The tip of his pocket knife was so sharp, it was best to cooperate. I was being violated in so many ways. I needed to use the bathroom badly, and somehow it seemed as if he read my mind. He dragged me off the couch and threw me to the floor, and had the balls to kick me twice in the ribs. Then, with a closed fist, punched me in the face several times. I could feel the blood flowing from my nose and into my mouth, and immediately felt a lot heavier. He pointed towards the bathroom, and I began to slowly crawl in his direction. I knew I was probably not going to make it out of there alive, but I couldn't understand why he hated me so much. But what about my children? What would happen to them? There was women's underwear and children's toys scattered all over the wooden floor. I grabbed a moist towel from the floor, noticing that neither my clothes nor purse were in sight. Then I heard a phone vibrating. I quickly located it. There it was, a beautiful flip phone. As soon as I opened it, I dialed 911 immediately. I began digging around the bathroom for any information that I could provide to emergency services. They answered, asking what my emergency was. I let the dispatcher know that it wasn't a prank call, that I had been kidnapped, drugged, raped, and brutally beaten by a man. I gave the address I had found on a prescription bottle label in the medicine cabinet. I was in Gilbert, Arizona. I was trying my best to give the best description of Victor, when quickly he tears down the bathroom door. I'm greeted with a fist across my jaw, causing me to stumble and hit my head at the edge of the sink. My heart sank as the flip phone went flying across the floor. I'm losing consciousness, trying to protest from drinking whatever he's forcing down my throat, but obviously I don't have a choice, because what I hear next just confirmed that I was very much dead. A click. I knew what it was. It was a firearm. I felt the cold barrel of the 9mm that was against my temple. I could feel the warm blood dripping down into my chest from my face. And then Victor said the following. "You called the cops. We have to go now. Besides, I need to get rid of you, because my wife and kids will be home soon." I could barely stay awake, so Victor tried to drag me by the hair. But it was taking too long and he lost his patience. He proceeded to drag me by the arm from the 3rd floor. As he exited the door, he grabbed me, threw me over his shoulder, and was trying to get me in the truck. But somehow I was fighting him. I figured he was going to kill me anyway. I might as well fight this deranged, evil man. I was screaming, biting, kicking, and scratching, but I couldn't see because my eyes were closed shut from injuries. But I imagined he needed the gun to shoot me, then go through my body in the desert. Then I heard the police sirens and people coming out of their apartments to hear the commotion, and I began screaming that he's going to kill me in both English and Spanish. As multiple police cruisers came closer, Victor threw my body into the apartment complex garbage bin and peeled off. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I needed sutures in many parts of my body. I had a dislocated shoulder, a broken nose, multiple head injuries, many lacerations, and my body was full of bruises. According to the ER doctor, the toxicology report showed 5 different types of drugs, but my alcohol was below the legal limit. You might be wondering what happened to Victor. I saw him when I was able to testify in court. There were 2 other women who came forward with their testimonies and gave Victor an additional 5 years on top of the 8 he got for the crimes he committed against me. Victor whispered a threat when he got sentenced, something that no victim wants to hear. Someday, I'll get out, and I'll hunt you down and finish the job. Listeners, please be cautious, especially if you're going out drinking. Stay with a trusty group of friends, and please keep an eye on your drink and theirs. When in doubt, listen to your gut. This experience changed me. I stopped drinking many years ago and have major trust issues. I cannot emphasize it enough. Always be aware of your surroundings. I was about 7 years old. My brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mum woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us 3 at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mum had a bad habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mum wrote off as my brother telling ghost stories to try and scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified of it, for fear of seeing a ghost at the other end of the hallway or through the window is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was 18, my mum and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendencies towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mum blurted out, "Don't you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise, because in all the years I lived in that house we never once called the cops. Gun-owner family in a quiet rural neighborhood. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. Well, one night I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked I saw a man standing in my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. Turns out he'd escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now I know it sounds so obvious hearing these 2 stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. One evening about 5 years ago, I travelled to Loch Ness with a friend to see the loch and the surrounding area. We had planned on arriving by afternoon to spend the evening and then head to the hotel when it got dark. That was perfect. We got there no problems and spent the day talking and taking in the beautiful landscape. The moon began to rise, and then we decided it was time to head back, as we had spent the majority of it there. As my friend began to drive back, she went around a sharp bend, and I mean the word to it is very meaning. She narrowly avoided a man standing on the edge. She was quite understandably in shock and slammed on her brakes in sheer panic. She began to pant, verging on hyperventilating, as I tried to calm her down. She had believed she hit the man when she swerved. The man was okay, as we later learned, because he walked towards the car and apologized for standing so near the road. After, we tried to make small talk with repeat apologies. He showed me 2 pictures and asked if I knew the people, because he was trying to track them down. It was dark, so I switched on the light and quickly glanced, then I said I didn't. I showed my friend and she shook her head without properly looking, but was still in shock. The man didn't ask for the photos back, nor did that conversation go any further. He apologized again and wished us a good night. Without realizing, I joked that we would be better once we got back to the hotel. He laughed and walked off, and we drove on. When we were in the hotel room, I looked at the 2 pictures more attentively and felt sick to the pit of my stomach. One picture was of me and my friend stood at the water's edge overlooking the loch with my arm wrapped around her. The picture had been taken from behind. The second picture was of me and my friend walking together, our faces clearly seen. That picture was taken from the side, but it must have been done in a wooded area because you could see tree branches. We both sat there for about an hour with the pictures at our fingertips facing us, speechless. I tried to remember the man, but couldn't remember any features because of the darkness besides a beard, glasses, and that he was soft-spoken. Later that night, I was awoken by my friend who was screaming frantically. When I ran into the room, she said that the man with the tall glasses was watching her through the window. We packed up and left, and I've never been back to Loch Ness since. This incident happened at my ex-girlfriend's friend's house. We're still good friends. He's a single dad called Scott, and at the time of this incident, Scott's daughter was only shy of 4 years old. Scott lives in a pretty old house in LA with wood floors and was built in the 20s. It's a modest 2-bedroom home where it's just him and his daughter. Scott is a complete skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, but even he says his house feels creepy at times. The odd knock here, faint footsteps there, pretty much the usual creepy old house noises in his opinion. He does wake up from them from time to time, hearing his daughter talking to her imaginary friend, while also having a deep and intense feeling of dread. He chalks this up to sleep paralysis, and his toddler being a toddler. Fast forward to the day of the incident. His daughter was busy playing with her toys in a sort of empty den he has, where she has a few toys in the corner of the room. It's a handy place for her to play while he works from home, so he can still keep an eye out for her. So she's playing away, having her normal conversation with her friend. This time, Scott was curious and asked who she was talking to. She giggled and told him that she was asking for her to go to her house and play with her. Scott asked where she lived. She shrugged and answered, "I don't know." Then she hops up and tells her dad that she's right there in the room. She then starts asking for Daddy to take pictures of both of them. Now, Scott doesn't really believe his daughter is talking with a ghost. His daughter is at that age where she's fascinated with phones and cameras and any sort of technology, really. He, being the good dad he is, pulls his phone out and begins taking pictures. At first, he snaps 1 or 2 and is trying to get his daughter to smile. He then starts taking burst photos and sort of teasing and playing with his daughter, and says to her, "Tell your friend to smile too," trying to make his daughter feel like she isn't strange for having an imaginary friend. Well, when he says this, she gets a very serious face and says, "Dad, Lily never smiles." Something about the way she said it sent chills down his spine. What's worse is that later, he's scrolling through the burst pictures he took earlier and was deleting one after another and just generally cleaning up the folder so it wasn't full of the same pictures over and over. So anyway, he's swiping, deleting, until he gets to this picture. This happened to my mum's best friend. She was driving home late one night from work when she got pulled over by a police officer. She had no idea why, but figured it could be a tail light or something, so she pulled over. When the officer approached, he confirmed to her that her tail light was out and asked for her license and registration, so she gave it to him and he disappeared to his car for a while. Later he came back. He started asking her weirder and weirder questions. They started regularly. Where are you going / coming from? But then they started getting personal. Do you have a husband at home? Any children? Any weapons? A daughter? Any aggressive pets? Once the questions started getting concerningly personal, she told him that it was inappropriate to be asking these questions. Then he started getting aggressive. "I'm a cop. Do you know what that means? It means you shut up and do what I say. Now step out the car." Obviously, she was pretty scared at this point. She rolled up the window and started looking through her purse for her phone. At this point, the officer went straight up violent. He was pounding on her window and trying her door, yelling crazy stuff like, "Get out of the car, you dirty, insert curse word here." So in a full-blown panic, she stepped on the gas and drove away. A chase occurred for a short while, but the cop quickly stopped following her as she got closer to the main road. She then called 911 where she learned that there were no officers that were supposed to be in that location. It was in the coming days it turned out that there was a rapist who was posing as a cop in the area. She had never had a broken taillight at all, but he had her address, her personal info, and even knew about her husband and daughter. She told him she didn't own weapons, so she immediately purchased a pistol. Unfortunately, she was forced to live in fear for a while until they finally caught the man. I have a pretty disturbing story to share. It all starts in December of 1993. I was living in Aurora at the time. It was around 9 p.m. and I had just finished my martial arts class and was waiting outside for my mum to pick me up from the school. My martial arts school was in a smaller shopping center near a well-traveled intersection on the west end of Aurora near Denver. Adjacent to my school in the same parking lot was a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant. It usually closed around the time my class got out, but occasionally some of us would go and play video games or get breadsticks while we waited for class to begin. This particular evening it wasn't terribly cold. It was mid-December, but the winters in Colorado can be somewhat mild. I was still pumped from class, and I was running around the parking lot with another one of the kids from my class. We were distracted, so we did not see the figure enter Chuck E. Cheese. It was the loud popping noise coming from the building that got our attention. Before we could grasp what was happening, a kid came running out of the restaurant with a gun in his hand. He practically ran right into us. The next thing I know, he's pointing it at my face. He just stood there for a minute. It was like time froze. I could not take my eyes off the barrel, and all I could think of was this was probably the last thing I wanted to see in the world. After what seemed like a long time, but was probably a few seconds, I looked past the gun at his face. He wasn't even looking at me, he looked scared. I could see his finger on the trigger, and wasn't sure if he was going to pull it or not. I was frozen, and could not have stopped him if he was. Instead, he turned and ran without a word. I watched him go, glued to the ground, amazed that I was still alive. He took off around the side of the building and was gone. My classmate and I just sat on the pavement. Neither of us said anything. Eventually, my mum showed up to give me a ride. I'm sure she was curious why I was acting funny, but I could not bring myself to tell her what happened. As far as I know, she still doesn't know to this day. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I heard people in school talking about what happened. The kid's name was Nathan Dunlap. He murdered 4 people I know personally in cold blood and critically wounded another. He had ditched the gun in an attempt to escape. That led to his arrest and eventual conviction. He was to be executed earlier this year for the crime, but was given a stay by the governor of Colorado. Having known that he had killed those people, I believe he would have killed us too. I'm not sure what distracted him that night, but I'm grateful. My family knows I was there that night. I don't think they know the extent of my involvement. I was never questioned about it, and until now, have never really volunteered any information about it at all. But I am now, because some things you learn to let go of. I don't know how much you know about him or what he did, but for a recap, the kids he killed were my age at the time. I didn't find out the extent of what he did until the next day, when I was face to face with him. At that time, I did not know he had just killed 4 people. He looked right at me, but I don't think he saw me. He looked more scared than I was, and I was the one with the gun in their face. I don't know if he should have gotten executed. He claims now that he has found God or whatever in prison, and that he's a different person. Perhaps it's true, perhaps it's not. It will never change the fact he executed 4 children in cold blood over nothing. He is where he belongs, and I'd almost rather see him have him live out the rest of his days reliving what he did, instead of getting the easy way out. When I was young, I used to see things I couldn't explain. One of the most notable times was when I was a kid, sleeping on the top bunk in a room with my brother. I woke up in the middle of the night, not really knowing why. When I looked over the shoulder of the bunk bed, I saw what looked like a chariot floating in the air going from left to right. The chariot was small, probably about the height of my hand, and it moved in a snake-like way, slithering up and down, like a sound wave or something. In the chariot sat a man and a woman dressed in old-style Victorian clothing. The chariot was being drawn by a long row of horses side by side. It is worthwhile to note that the entire chariot was made up of what looked like fluorescent light, in different shades of white, teal, green and red. Once the first pair of horses hit a certain spot in the room, they disappeared, and each pair of horses, and finally the chariot did the same, almost like they were going through an invisible portal. I would tell my parents about the thing that I saw, and it led to a few years of counseling. Knowing what I do now about the paranormal, I know that I wasn't in need of counseling at all, as I have no schizophrenic background or anything else that would explain what I did. Skip forward to the tender age of 16. I had just recently gotten my driver's license at this time, and I went to hang out with my friends in the neighboring town. As night came, I decided I better get home because I still wasn't too fond of driving at night. Regardless, the sun was completely down, and darkness had come by the time I'd left. The roads that take me from my friend's town back to mine are very rural, with either cornfields or forest on either side. No street lights and hardly any traffic. I turned onto the last rural road leading up to my neighborhood and started going up the steep hill onto the streets. As I reached the top of the hill and made my way over, I saw something strange. On the right side of the road, walking away from me with her back turned, was an old lady walking a small white dog. The lady was wearing a nightgown, white, and white high socks or tights, and had old grey/white hair. Literally everything about this lady and her dog was pure white. I almost swerved out the way in shock because this is not a road you ever see anyone walking down. It's a 55-mile-an-hour road with no shoulder in the middle of the countryside. After I passed her, I looked in my rearview mirror, and she had vanished. I want to point out the area I am in is inhabited mostly by wealthy families that keep to themselves, so the chance of it being some sort of crackhead or whatever are about 1 in a million. After I got home, I went to use the bathroom. I remember clearly thinking to myself, did I just see a ghost? And as I was thinking that, a bottle of shampoo fell from the top shelf of a cabinet in my bathroom. This could have been a coincidence, but never in my 10 years of living here has anything fallen off that shelf. There's a very famous ghost story around my area, Chicagoland, of a lady called Resurrection Mary. She was hit and killed by a car in a town about an hour from my house. Since the 1930s, she's been reported seen walking down the side of the road, hitchhiking in a white gown with blonde hair. I'd not heard of this story until recently, and it got me thinking about my experience. The description of Resurrection Mary is pretty damn close to what I saw. I don't think what I saw was her necessarily, especially considering the distance between her reported location and my sighting, but the similarities certainly shocked me. This story takes place 10 years ago. I was 14 at the time. I grew up in an old farmhouse far out on a rural road. Cornfields surrounded our home, and our closest neighbors were 2 to 3 miles away. The nearest town was a 15-minute drive. One thing that was really nice about living out there was that you didn't get a lot of strangers knocking at your door to either sell or talk religion with you, but we did get a few. One night it was just my mother and I home, making baked goods for a fundraiser for my little brother's Boy Scout troop. Dad and brother were out helping my uncle with some cows, if I remember rightly. We were bustling around the kitchen, talking and laughing. Mum and I have always been close. Soon we heard a knock at the door, just an average normal knock. A tap tap tap. Mum, to herself, and took off her dishing gloves to open the door. I stood at the kitchen island, rolling out some dough for a few pies, but also watching my mother go to the door. I had a slight twinge of anxiety in my stomach, but chalked it up as being one of my normal flurries. As my mum walked towards the door, the person on the other side gave another tap, this time in a rhythm. My mum stopped. She turned and began walking back to the kitchen with a pale look on her face. She went to our kitchen window that seemed to face out towards the porch. She went to the side where you'd be able to see the porch clearly. Mum pulled back the curtain enough to peek and not be noticed from the outside. The look on her face deepened. She went to the other side of the window then, to look out at the driveway. I had stopped what I was doing at this point, deciding that pie crusts probably weren't that important in this moment, as the feeling in my stomach was in a full-blown flurry. Mum's eyes widened as she looked out. She then closed the curtain and looked at the floor. The look on her face was angry but also scared. She walked over and grabbed my wrist and walked us to the closet as she quietly asked me if I had my cell phone. I did. She pulled out my dad's prized Louisville Slugger from the closet. The person at the door started banging at the door hard. I gasped a bit. Mum looked at me and shushed me, then took my arm again and walked me towards my parents' bedroom, locking the door and windows as we went. At one point, she stopped at the window in our living room and peeked out. She closed it quickly and let out a frustrated noise. We got to the bedroom and she pulled me in and locked the door. She took my phone and began dialing as she gave me the bat. She sat me down on the floor on the side where I'd be hidden from the door and opened the closet to get the gun case. She talked quietly on the phone and I was terrified and couldn't focus on what she was saying. She pulled out my dad's shotgun and quickly loaded it. I looked at her, scared as she hung up. She pulls me up again and walks me out the bedroom. We creeped back over to the other side of the house where the bathroom was. Mum gave me my phone and ushered me inside. She set down the gun and looked at me with both hands on her shoulders. "You need to listen to me. There are some men outside, and they're walking around the side of the house." I looked at her with wide eyes. I could feel myself shaking. "Why? What do they want?" "I don't know, but you need to stay in here, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you. Understand me?" I nodded, and she squeezed my shoulders. "I'm going to barricade the door from the other side. I will not move the barricade until I let you know that it's me." I knew what she was saying immediately. Crawl out the bathroom window and run if it's moved otherwise. My mum shut the door and I quickly locked it. I heard her move the quartz chest in front of the door, a very heavy box with lots of quartz from over the years. I sat on the floor in front of the window clutching the baseball bat. I sat there for what seemed like hours, but was merely 5 minutes. While I sat there, I heard 2 footsteps outside the window. 2 deep voices talking quietly. "You sure they're in there? Maybe no one's home." "Nah, there's at least 2 women in there. Heard them talking at the door. Saw a guy and a kid leave when we passed the house earlier." I shivered and started to hyperventilate, but quickly covered my mouth with a towel to mute it. Who were they? What did they want? Why were they here? Soon I heard another voice. "Guys, let's go. Charlie spotted cops down the road." Then I heard 3 sets of feet running towards the front of the house. I was crying at this point, tears pouring down my face. Was it over? Were they leaving? A few more minutes go by and I hear a man's voice in the house. I started to panic and huddled into the corner of the bathroom, and I heard my mum's voice on the other side of the bathroom door. "It's me. The sheriff's here, they're gone. I'm moving the trunk." I got up and unlocked the door and opened it to find the sheriff and my mum moving the trunk out the way. I quickly ran to my mum's arms and we stood there holding each other. The sheriff said he had quite a few more officers chasing down the van and that he needed to ask me and my mum some questions. My mum nodded and we walked to the kitchen where there was the smell of burnt cookies in the air. The sheriff asked us questions, and that's when I found out what my mum saw. When she looked out and saw the man who was knocking at our door, she knew something was off immediately. He was casually dressed, gym shorts and a wife beater, not something a salesman or person of a church would wear when coming around. So then my mum thought that maybe his car broke down or something and that he was looking for help. So she looked out at the driveway and saw something that made her stomach drop. There was a van in our drive, parked in a way that wouldn't allow my mother's car to leave, with a man in the passenger seat and another leaning in towards the front of the van, talking to the passenger. But Mum noticed that even though both were still, the van was still slightly rocking, like there were more people inside. As my mum and I were finishing up with the sheriff, a deputy walked in and he looked pale. He looked at my mum, the sheriff and me, and the deputy went, "Sir, we were able to catch up with the van. They lost control and swerved into the ditch, actually." "Any of them hurt?" "No, they're fine, but we have them in custody." The sheriff quirked an eyebrow. "There were 5 men in the van. We asked them what they were doing out here, and what they walked around the house like they did for." "And? What did they say?" "They said they were vacuum salesmen, sir. That they were a team out trying to sell their product they made." The sheriff scoffed for a bit. "Well, Jones ended up checking the van and... Well, what? Do we have a drug bust or something?" The deputy gulped and looked at my mum and me again. "No, sir, not what we found at all." They took my mum outside and told her what they found. She was horrified and came back, sobbing and holding me. After that, they phoned my dad, and he came rushing home. My other uncle, a mountain of a man, stayed that night just in case. Dad and Mum spent no expense on home security and taught both of us kids how to shoot and load a gun. My aunt and uncle gave us one of their German Shepherd puppies as well. Mum had to train him to be an attack dog, though you wouldn't be able to tell. When not in defense, he was a dopey, lovable pup. This still wasn't enough to settle Mum though, and brother and I ended up going to self-defense lessons too. My cousins were sent with us. It wasn't until a few years later that I found out what was in the van. Coincidentally, we were making cookies and other homemade candy for a Christmas party. I finally asked my mum about it, and she was shocked that I asked, but knew I'd find out eventually. So what was in the van? They found rope, tape, burlap saps, and even sedatives, as well as a gun, several of them, and what the police described as burner phones. When they had taken all the guys back, and after hours of questioning, one of them broke and said they were having no luck in nabbing anyone in town, so they went out to rural areas. The closest town is a very tightly knit community where everyone watches each other's back. This terrified me. I would have never have guessed it. To this day, I'm very careful about whom I open the door for, and I can't sleep unless I have some sort of weapon in the bedside table. It's really shattered my trust in others. I go out and automatically assume most people are going to hurt me. My therapist is trying to help me with this. I sincerely hope that I never have to go through another situation like this again. You know how people say, trust your gut feeling? Well, here's how I learned to trust mine. When my girlfriend and I were traveling in Australia. We were both there on our working holiday visas and met each other at work. After nearly a year, my girlfriend's visa was about to expire, but mine lasted another 6 or 7 months due to working on a farm prior. Since we had spent most of our time in the beautiful city of Sydney, we were ready to see other parts of the country too. What most backpackers do is pay a company that takes them up the east coast by bus, or simply rent a camper van and drive to the coast themselves. We chose the latter option with a few changes. We were going to start the journey by bus up to Brisbane, and from there rent a car that would take us all the way up north, from which eventually we would take a plane to Asia. So the day came. We said goodbye to our workplace and our friends that we had made during our stay, and went off. After a few days in and around the area of Brisbane, we started looking to rent a van. Not having a lot of money, and wanting to save what we had for other adventures, we eventually settled on renting the smallest and cheapest Subaru that we could find, since we figured it would be uncomfortable to sleep in the car, and bought a tent instead. This car was even so small that it came with a map, showing where we were allowed to drive, and which roads that it would be too tough for. So the journey continued, and with the help of our rental, we had the option to visit less known or touristy places. We saw some really amazing things along the coast, and since we had enough time, we decided to see some of the real Australia. You know, the rustic desert with red sand that you'd see on postcards of the outback. So the next day we changed our course from north and started going west. The GPS was showing a drive of about 10 to 11 hours, until our goal, which was a small town in the middle of nowhere. Not too bad. I was the only one with a driver's license, and I had done trips like this before. Leaving the coastline behind, it didn't take long for the climate to change, and soon we found ourselves in places just like those on the postcards. The ocean wasn't the only thing we left behind. It seemed the further away we got, the lesser civilization we saw, which was understandable. And we had gone way past the area we were allowed to drive in with our little car. We weren't worried though. The roads were all kept well, and this was our trip which we were going to enjoy. This meant taking a lot of breaks for pictures, and to take in the new landscape and scenery, which in turn made it a longer drive. Eventually the sun started to set, as we headed towards the horizon. Now here is a thing that you need to know about driving in Australia. You need to be very careful while driving at night, or preferably do not drive at night at all. This is due to the amount of kangaroos crossing the road, with some of them being as large as a fully grown man. How many people told me this before our trip? So many. But during our drive, we were so far away and hadn't seen a single one, and figured that people must have been exaggerating. Now as the sun started to set, and we actually saw a kangaroo for the first time, it was nice seeing it up close. We soon realized what people had been telling us was true. With the sun gone, the sides of the road started to fill with them. It was almost like something out of a vampire or zombie movie. After a few close calls, we had to slam on the brakes to not hit any crossing animals, and we eventually just kept a very slow pace. This, of course, meant an even greater delay in our drive. After a while of driving like this, and when daylight was completely gone, we came across a small town. Being quite hungry, and not knowing how long it would be to the next town, we decided to stop and see if we could find anything to eat. This place we had just ended up at gave us a bit of a freaky vibe. Maybe it was just because we were in the middle of nowhere, and we both came from the city. Perhaps it was because the place was so badly lit, and there probably wasn't more than 10 houses. My city brain probably freaked out a bit and thought, this looks like the hills have eyes. At least it had a bar and a restaurant. The place was probably frequented by truckers going through these roads. We entered, and I guess every person in the town must have been there, which weren't much, along with 1 or 2 truckers. My girlfriend and I stuck out like sore thumbs. As soon as we sat down and ordered our food and drinks, the people next to us, it may have been some sort of family, sat down by the table next to ours. We ate. I didn't pay them much attention. That is until I heard something they said, which made my ears grow wide and a chill that ran down my spine. Now I can understand that people living out there would have fun spooking the tourists coming through, and I'm not sure if that's what their intentions were, but it got my attention as they uttered Wolf Creek. If you've been in Australia, you may have heard about the story. I don't think any traveller there hasn't heard of it. Looking back at it, it sometimes felt like a mythological creature you would tell your kids about to scare them. Except, these stories are true. Wolf Creek is a movie based on a serial killer who targeted backpackers travelling in desolate places in the 90s. I guess it happened in various ways, but he often incapacitated and tortured his victims before ending them. As you can understand, it is a nightmare for backpackers. However, fortunately for everyone, he was eventually caught and imprisoned. What this group of people next to us were talking about was that the police had arrested the wrong guy, and that the real Wolf Creek killer was still out there. I was sitting there listening to every word coming out of their mouths while my blood was running cold, and trying not to seem disturbed in front of my girlfriend, who didn't notice the conversation taking place. Again, I'm not sure if they were just full of rubbish and were trying to scare us, but I was getting freaked out. As we finished eating and paid, we were leaving, and the trucker sitting in the bar turned to me and said something like, "You really should stay here for the night. You're a fool if you're going to try and drive away at this time." Well, I sure as hell wasn't going to stay there with my girlfriend. I turned the door handle and walked out. Before driving off, I actually checked everything about the car to make sure no one had been messing with it while we were eating, but couldn't find anything wrong with it. As soon as we left the town, however, I started to understand what the trucker had been saying. If it was bad before, it was worse now. Kangaroos were running everywhere. I'm pretty sure we hit one small poor creature, and I'm saying pretty sure because I didn't want to get out to check even if I did. That's how bad my gut feeling about this place was. It made us eventually have to drive even slower than before, and we were now pushing 30 kilometers an hour, a grueling and excruciatingly slow pace. This was absurd. At this speed we would have to drive all night just to get to the next town. When I looked back in the rearview mirror, I started to get an even more uneasy feeling. Bright headlights coming up behind us fast. At the time we had been driving for about half hour out of town, and I couldn't see any trace of anyone, just us and another car out of nowhere. And I do mean nowhere, except for our lights and the lights following. It was pitch black. You might think I was too chicken to consider our circumstances. I bet you would too. You couldn't see anything except the part of the road that was illuminated. As the car came closer and closer, I got tender and tender until it was right behind us, lighting up our whole car. Then it just passed us. It was a massive pickup with a metal bumper guard in front of it. You could see how this guy could keep his speed. He had no respect for wildlife. As we took advantage of the moment and picked up our own speed to follow the car, we could see the unlucky kangaroos flying off his bumper guard. Well, that was all the excitement we had for the night. After a few hours, we could see the lights from the next town, which we had discovered was a bit larger and had a nicer feeling to it. We took into a hotel for the night and slept far into the next day. We weren't in a hurry to leave. In the morning, we took our time in staying in the area and having a late breakfast. The GPS said that it would be at least another 4 hours until we could reach our destination. We were on the road again in the afternoon, and in daylight, we could see what happened to the unlucky kangaroos that had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sides of the road were filled with carcasses, some new, some old, some probably had to have been there for years. We later learnt it hadn't rained in the area for about 6 years, so everything that died didn't decompose but simply dried out, and I guess there weren't that many animals out there that would eat bodies, at least not this amount. The stench was horrible. Every time we took a break and got out the car, I really don't think there was an area next to the road that didn't have some sort of bones or fur for the entirety of the drive. As the sun started to set, we got a bit anxious again. We really didn't want to have to redo the experience from the night before. The signs were all there, and the kangaroos were lining up like zombies just as before. However, as the sun had passed beyond the horizon, we saw our goal. We had chosen this town since it was known to have dinosaur tracks and fossils in the area, and we noticed as we entered between the buildings, and it was way bigger with more people and tourists than the town that we had been driving past. That doesn't say much. You could probably walk from one end to the other in 10 minutes, but compared to the other towns, it was a metropolis. We asked around the town hotel and the camping ground if they had any space for us, but they were all fully booked. Understandably, we were probably the last people to enter for the day. At least we got somewhere to eat while we planned how we would sleep for the night. Since we didn't want to be rude to other people living there, we thought it wouldn't be a good idea to sleep on the street in our car, and both agreed not to sleep in the tent we bought because of snakes and spiders, you know. Well, eventually we came up with the idea to park just outside of town and sleep in our car there. We found a spot that usually must have been used for truckers to park. It was dark, so I'm not sure, but the ground was made of asphalt, and we could just make out the signature of a bus standing in the dark. The bus driver must have either slept in there or in the hotel. In front of us was the town, illuminated by the streetlights, and behind us was absolutely nothing. It almost felt like being on the edge of drifting into the universe. If you would have continued in the direction right back from where we were standing, you could probably have driven for days without seeing another human or anything man-made. The map showed no roads or settlements in that direction for ages. We made ourselves as comfortable as we could in our small car, and said goodnight before trying to fall asleep. Maybe it's just something that automatically kicks in at night, but it's a really uneasy feeling that was upon me, and the conversation between the people yesterday was still ringing in my ears. The townspeople had long since gone to bed, and it was dead silent. Actually, everything was dead silent. Not a bird or insect was making a sound, not even the wind. Before I started to doze off, I looked at the dashboard. 12 a.m. it said. Suddenly my eyes flung open, and my girlfriend grabbed my arm and was holding a tight grip, looking at me with fear in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Something feels wrong." I understood. I could feel it too. The bad gut feeling was turned up beyond maximum. The clock on the dashboard showed 2 a.m. I looked around through the car window. It was difficult to see anything since we had fogged up the glass with our breath. The bus, however, was no longer in its place. It was now just us. We were all alone. Suddenly a loud bang sounded from right behind the car. It was the sound of metal to metal, and I could feel my heart beat so hard and could even feel the pressure all the way down to my toes. "Go," my girlfriend screamed, and I couldn't agree more. I stuck the keys in the ignition and started the engine as quickly as I could. It's lucky we had rented an automatic car, because I'm sure I would have panic stalled in another one. All the birds were screaming and shouting as loudly as they could from the bushes and trees around us. They all knew that something dangerous was about. Dust and gravel were flying around the tires as we sped out of the rest stop. I didn't really know where we were going, but I just knew that I wanted to get the hell out of that place. We reached the town centre. In the square, we looked around to see if anyone was following us, and noticed several other cars and trucks being parked around us with people sleeping in them. This gave us some assurance that our hearts could slow down a bit. After a while sitting there, going through what happened, I guess my girlfriend fell asleep. Or maybe, like me, she just appeared to be. I kept at least one eye open until it started to get light out about 3 hours later. When we both awoke again, the sun was already far in the sky, and people were out and about on the streets. As I was about to open the door, I noticed a large greasy handprint on the driver's side window. I'm not sure if it was there when I eventually closed my eyes a few hours earlier, or if it had been planted there afterwards. As I looked at the dashboard again to see what time it was, something else caught my attention. The indicator showing which doors were open, and it showed that the door behind me wasn't closed. I looked behind it, and sure enough, when I stepped out to check, I noticed that it wasn't. I'm not sure if it was us who didn't manage to close it completely the previous night, but what I do know is that we had slept with the doors locked. But if one door had been open, that means anyone could have gotten in. Yet again, I don't know if someone was just playing a prank on us, or if it was something more sinister. When we talked about it later, my girlfriend had been thinking it had something to do with aliens. She had quite a phobia of them, and there have been several strange sightings in the outback of Australia. However, my thoughts regarding the night's events made me remember the conversation about Wolf Creek Killer again, and how they said he was never caught. What scared me the most about this incident wasn't the loud banging behind us or the handprint on the window, or even that the door had stayed open. What scared me the most was that both of us, me and my girlfriend, felt that unexplainable feeling of terror that made us wake up in the night. It's that feeling that is now convincing me it wasn't just someone playing a prank, but actually someone wanting to harm us. After we had woken up in that morning, we had our breakfast and everything felt great again, and the gut feeling that I had been having for the last 2 days was gone. The rest of our trip went great, and without any more scary incidences. However, it did teach me one thing: to always listen to my gut. My boyfriend at the time was driving me home in the dark. I lived in a really rural area, tons of farms and open fields with winding roads. You didn't pass other cars very often, especially this late at night. As we were driving, we saw this lady in white far ahead of us on a straight stretch of road. I know we both saw it, because my boyfriend commented how weird it was she was out so late. I told him that some people just go walking at night, which was true, and she probably lived around there, since it was so rural. Night walkers weren't an uncommon thing, since the only thing you had to worry about was the wildlife. We got closer, and I saw the woman was facing us. Her hair was pretty light-colored too, so it was hard to really make her out in the headlights because she was so pale and the lights just reflected off her. She wasn't moving, just facing us as we drove by. And then, right as we were about to pass her, she stepped in front of the car. My boyfriend slammed on the brakes. I flew hard, nearly hitting my head on the dash, and for about 5 seconds we were both silent from shock. I was pretty sure we had just hit someone, and being only 15 at the time, that was a hard thing to wrap my head around. But I still got out the car to check on the woman. You can probably guess the next thing that happened. We get out the car and find a huge dent on the hood of the car, but no sign of the woman. In fact, there wasn't any sign of anything at all. There was no blood, and we couldn't hear anything around us besides crickets. Everything was just as solemn as it normally was around the area. We looked around for the woman in a nearby bush and everything, but never found a thing. Like I said, there weren't any houses near enough for her to have run to. There weren't any places she could have really hidden, and it was like she was never there, except for the huge dent in my boyfriend's car. We drove in silence the rest of the way home. I'm not really a big ghost or paranormal person, but this really hit me hard. I told my mum what happened, and she asked all of our neighbors if they knew something. But most of them were elderly retirees and didn't know any younger women moving in the area. A few creepy details could be that around the next corner was the old cemetery, where some early settlers were laid to rest, and some girl had died a few years back from being hit by a car when the driver fell asleep not too far from that area. But you can do with that what you will. It's such a classic horror tale no one believes me. But I know it happened because Jesus Christ, that dent cost my boyfriend a pretty penny to fix, and he was not a happy camper for the rest of the week. A few years ago, I was staying at my great-granddad's house because he had gone into a home and we needed someone to look after it. I had always seen and heard strange things happening around me, but had just put up with it to help out my family. One day I was out in the sunshine room having a coffee and reading a book, when I realized I needed to go up the street to get some things, so I went into the house and closed all the doors inside. It was a pretty warm day, so I wanted to close everything so the air conditioning worked best. I closed the doors inside, locked the front and back door, and leave for about 15 minutes. Come home to chaos. Unlocked the back door to find every single door inside wide open, cupboard doors as well. I went through the house, checked the front door, still locked, and felt something move behind me and spun around, but there was nothing. By this stage I was pretty freaked out, so I started to back my way out the back door again. I could see shapes or shadows moving at the edge of my vision, but when I looked directly at them there was nothing. So I backed my way out to the sunshine room, and then noticed the book I was reading, the coffee cup, ashtray, and everything that was on the table was scattered on the floor. Looked inside. It was the same. Not ransacked, but random stuff was scattered. I saw more movement inside it too. Multiple movements. Just shadows, but there were several of them moving around inside. I didn't want to leave because I still was trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Or maybe I had walked in on a home burglary. Once I heard the doors start to close and open again, I was done. Nothing could make me walk back into that house alone. I sat outside in the sunshine room for about an hour, waited for my wife to come home from work, and watched these shadows wander around my house and have a spectral party or whatever the whole time, trying to convince myself there was another rational explanation. I heard my wife's car pull up in the driveway and everything disappeared. No movement, nothing. She walks in and asks me why I trashed the sunroom. I was 25 and a male, by the way. It never happened again after that, at least not to that extent. A few weeks ago, I had a weird experience. I bought myself my first car lately, and I'm fairly new to driving, but I needed to get to and from my new place of work. I usually work in the afternoon, and on this day I took a little nap right before I had to leave for work. I was half asleep when suddenly a weird voice told me, "Don't take the highway today." It was so clear, it startled me and awoke me. I got ready for work and stepped into the car. Despite having this weird feeling, I took the highway. While driving on the highway, I was almost hit by a truck that didn't let me through. My car made this scary loud beeping noise I've never heard before, and then suddenly the accelerator stopped working. I had to stop on the side of the highway. I was so scared, and I remember the voice immediately, cursing myself that I didn't listen to it. I honestly believe whatever that was tried to warn me and save me, because this could have turned out a lot worse. This happened about 5 years ago, after my fiancée and I had been living in our house for a little over a year. I'm 6 foot tall and about 225 pounds. I have always been naturally muscular, and am told I have an intimidating demeanor. My fiancée is 5 foot 2, weighs maybe 130, and is a little tiny thing. Our house is a bi-level home, where you walk in the front door, and there are 2 half staircases going up the living room or down the basement. The only access to our backyard is through the sliding glass door in the upstairs living room, and down the stairs from our deck. During this time I partied a lot, way more than I should have. I was between jobs and it was towards the end of the holidays, so my interest in finding a new job wasn't quite what it should have been. Many of these nights I was out partying. I would end up just crashing with friends, which meant my fiancée spent many nights alone with our 3 dogs. I had a serious problem with substance abuse, primarily alcohol, and I'm sad to say I was letting it get the better of me. Fast forward a few months, I had just found a new job that had random drug and alcohol test, a godsend in hindsight, and I had been sober for all of 2 days and had begun repairing my relationship with my fiancée when she told me how glad she was I was sleeping at home again. I thought nothing of it and kissed her on the head and told her I was too, and that I loved her. Later that night, my fiancée and I were watching TV downstairs, when I thought I heard something moving in our backyard. The dogs heard it too, but I dismissed it because they just perked up their ears but didn't seem too alarmed. A moment later, I hear the noise again and my fiancée very quickly mutes the TV and gives me a very nervous look. "Did you hear that?" she asked, looking very uncomfortable. I told her it's probably just a few of the neighborhood cats playing in our bushes, as there are quite a few outdoor cats living in the area. But she shook her head and began insisting that these weren't the case. Before I could even ask her what made her so sure, I hear our sliding glass door upstairs fly open. All 3 of my Great Danes and myself are on our feet in an instant. The dogs let out the most ferocious sounding barks I've ever heard and tore ass up the stairs with me right behind them. As I'm rounding the first set of stairs and the dogs are reaching the top of the second set, I see the sliding glass door slam closed and the silhouette of a man running away. I get to the door and fling it open, and the dogs shove me out of the way to chase after the would-be intruder. I grab my flashlight, one of those big 4D cell mag lights that cops carry, and run out into the yard. I had just made it down the deck stairs when I see the dogs are freaking out at the back fence. I sprint over and jump the fence, just in time to see the man reach the opposite fence and try to get over it. He was covered head to toe in black clothing, a thin black hoodie, with the hood pulled tight to conceal his face, and jet black cargo pants. Without any regard for my personal safety, I charged at the man and barely missed getting a hold of him as he made his way over the fence. Once more I followed him, and come around the front of my neighbor's house just in time to see him hop into an old beat-up pickup and speed off. I watch for a moment as he tears out of the neighborhood and disappears into the night. I run back home as fast as I can and check on my fiancée and make sure she's okay. When I walked into the house, she was sitting in the upstairs living room surrounded by all 3 of our Great Danes and clutching the biggest knife we own. She was visibly shaken, but ultimately she is a very strong woman, and told me she was ready in case I got into trouble. After calling the cops, giving statements, and triple checking to make sure every door and window in the house was locked up tight, we decided to watch another movie, as neither of us were tired after the adrenaline rush we'd been through. During the movie, I asked her what made us so sure before that it wasn't just cats playing in the yard. What she told me was enough for me to decide it was time to change my whole life. She said for about a month now she'd been hearing strange noises coming from all around the house late at night. She would hear footsteps outside and occasionally what sounded like whispering. When I asked her why she never told anyone, she just shook her head and said she didn't know. After hearing this, I came to the realization that whoever the man was, he knew that I was never home at night, and that my fiancée essentially was all alone most of the time. Fortunately for us, he somehow missed the fact that we have 3 Great Danes, and for whatever reason on this night he decided not to check and make sure she was alone again. Since that day I have been 100% sober from everything, 5 years total as of March 1st, and have not left my fiancée alone overnight since. Our relationship has never been stronger, and our 3 Great Danes are 3 of the best dogs anyone could ask for. In the end, this experience has changed my life completely, for the better. But creepy wannabe burglar, whatever you are, let's not meet. I'm a 23-year-old, somewhat physically fit male, who, unfortunately, has had his fair share of experiences in physical altercations through the years. I'm not that tall, maybe 5'9", weigh around 180 pounds, and while I'm not the most physically imposing guy out there, I do have a pretty broad frame. The reason I bring all of this up is because some people may think a guy may not be able to relate to many of the experiences shared, like girls being stalked or harassed. However, this isn't the case. I was scared to death this night, and I felt the need to share it with all of you. The events of this story occurred while I was approximately 16 years old and in high school. I'm now 23 and attending university to become a physical therapist. My life over the past 7 years between the time this event occurred and my life now have been chaotic, to say the least. I am a recovering drug addict, and I abused opiates and cocaine for 4 years before getting clean 21 months ago and getting my life straight. Because of this fact, I don't have the best memory of that time period. However, I will do my absolute best to recall everything to the finest detail my mind can muster. Nothing will be exaggerated, and if anything is murky, I will either let you know or omit it. But now, without further ado, let's begin. I live in the deep south and went to high school in a small to medium-sized town with roughly 30 to 50k people. Because the town is not the greatest size, there were not very many things to do on weeknights or weekends either, for that matter. This was before I got into the big partying phase. I was 16, and at that age you can choose between going to the movies, browsing the mall, going bowling, having dinner somewhere, or going to Broad Street, which is the main street in downtown that is a historical site and has a lot of shops and restaurants and stuff on it. Pretty much like a main street in most towns that actually have them. In high school, going out there and just walking it, or going to see the fountain or the bridges that go over many rivers in the town behind it, were popular things to do. The bridges over the rivers were also very popular for teenagers to smoke pot or to just hang out and talk. These bridges were very dimly lit and were very barely wide enough for a car to drive over. There were no cars allowed back there anyway. This place was strictly for scenery or walking your dog or whatever. Well, one night a few of my friends and I went back there to hang out and waste a Friday night. I didn't smoke pot, and there was another friend of mine there who didn't either. His name was Zach. So while my friends started smoking, Zach and I decided to just take a walk over the hill and check out the other bridges on the other side. We probably walked a good half mile to a mile away from them, to the point where if we screamed at them, or if they screamed at us, neither would hear. Also because we travelled over other hills, and the distance we travelled, we couldn't see our friends, or anyone else for that matter. It was a cool autumn night, and exceptionally dark out. I remember it being one of the darkest nights in living memory. Not especially cloudy, but there was no moon, or perhaps it was just incredibly dim. Being in the area we were in so far from Broad Street, and our friends didn't help either. The only lights we had were the very dim ones of the bridge. Zach and I were just standing there looking at the river flow gently beneath us, getting ready to head back to the others when we saw two silhouettes growing larger and larger towards us. It wasn't uncommon for people to walk their dogs back here, even at the later hours of the night. I believe it was around 11 p.m, and it also wasn't uncommon for other people to just be doing what we were doing. After all, that's what the place was built for. So at this point we aren't particularly frightened or anything. Personally, I didn't think anything of it, and at this point we had been gone for at least half hour, and assumed they would be finished, so we started to walk back, disregarding the dark figures, which we could now see in our peripheral vision. As we walked, we heard a sharp, loud whistle, one of those that people make by putting two fingers in their mouths and blowing. I still have no idea how to do it. So we turned around and looked. It was the two other silhouettes, now submerged under the revealing light of the bridge. "Y'all come on over here for a minute now, boys." There were two middle-aged men, one slightly taller than me and the other significantly taller. They were large dudes, both with completely shaved heads, bald as could be, and I'll never forget the way their eyes looked. The only way to describe them is crazy. Methed out possibly, maybe crack. They were absolutely delusional. Both were tattooed on their faces and the rest of their body, that we could see anyway, which wasn't much because they were both wearing long black leather trench coats. The shorter of the two was holding a brown paper bag. You can tell when a brown paper bag has alcohol or some sort of bottle in it, yet this didn't. I have no idea what was in the bag. The guys began asking us a lot of questions, very personal, scary questions, and they were both quite obviously neo-Nazis, identifiable by the shaved head and swastika tattooed on their faces. They would ask Zach and me things like, "Do you love your race, boy? Would you do anything for someone of your race? You ain't got no dirty blood in you, do you? Any poison running in your veins?" When confronted in a situation like this with two drug-induced, delusional, presumably killers interrogating you, you pretty much tell them everything that they want to hear. "Oh yes sir, very proud to be white. No sir, everyone in my family for generations has been white." I noticed Zach wasn't speaking. He was even more nervous than I was. Zach was raised by a white family, but he looked suspiciously of Native American descent. I often questioned if he was adopted. They questioned Zach more and more, but I stood there and told them that he was my brother, and he was indeed white. After we had convinced them of our racial heritage, they were satisfied that we were white. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, and they would let us go. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. For you to understand why we just didn't tell these two lumps to piss off, we have to go and then run, I should explain to you that the shorter of these two men had what appeared to be a 9mm pistol. I could be mistaken about the caliber, but it was unmistakably a pistol, hanging slightly out of the opening between his jacket pocket in the front. However, that wasn't even our main concern. With every gesture the larger man made while he spoke, he slung around a large knife in his hand, almost as if he had forgotten it was there. It was so casual. It wasn't a pocket knife. It was too large to be. It looked like one of those really large 9 to 10-inch blade knives they sell at convenience stores with dragons on the handle for $20. "We aren't from here. We're traveling soldiers for the white race," he explained. He told us they were from the state directly above mine, and they were here to purge the unclean. While the second round of conversation and questioning was going on, an elderly couple, maybe in their 50s to 60s, walked less than 40 yards away from us walking their dog. We all just stopped talking and looked at them. In my head, I'm begging them to please call the cops, and I'm giving them that rescue us look with my eye. They got past us, put their heads down and picked up the pace. It was at this point that the scariest part of my night happened. The shorter one took out his gun, casually. He made my friend Zach and I remember his phone number and remember the name of their army, stating they had a full team of snipers with their sights aimed at our heads right now, if we were unable to do so. Obviously there were no snipers on the rooftops, but don't ask me what his logical reasoning were behind this. People in drug-induced manias don't generally have the best logic nor reasoning. I know personally. The man said it a couple of times and gave me 30 seconds to memorize it. It was an out-of-state number, so a bit more difficult to naturally memorize it, and the name of their terrorist organization was something ridiculously confusing as well. Perhaps it was just the circumstances, but it was the scariest 30 seconds of my life. Remember and repeat and live. Screw up one number and potentially get shot dead on the spot. Obviously not by a team of snipers, but the very real threat was standing right in front of me. The time was up. I repeat it back, praying to a God I don't believe in that it was correct. It was. And after repeating it back, they sent us on our way. We immediately took off running back to our friends who were no longer there because of the amount of time we'd been gone. We explained to them what happened and called the police. They weren't out there, and searched the place, but the two men were gone. The number they'd given me didn't exist. No one had ever heard of their group. As far as I know, nothing came of it. They perhaps were only just drifting in our town. It was the single most frightening night of my entire life, and that is saying something. So please, racist, bigoted, ugly, idiotic scumbags low in the dirt neo-Nazis, let's never meet again. My mum once stopped to help an overturned car on the side of a highway. We got out and called the police. I saw the man choking the girl he was with. Went to tell my mum, and she waved me off. Guy came up, tried to get her off the phone and asked me if I could help. I sized him up. He was about 3 times my size, and I'm a scrawny little teenager, so I realized the only way we're going to get out of this is by playing cool and running. My mum would not let me talk to her, and if I tried to raise it to being serious or yelling or anything to get her attention, it would have gotten his too, as he was clearly intoxicated. He asked if I could help move the car. I had assumed it was because telling her to get off the phone wasn't working, so he was trying to bait me over to the car to hurt me. Or he was so drunk that he actually thought we would move an upside-down car up a bank. I told him that was a 10-man job, and his wife screamed at him, saying she got him punching her and crashing the car on camera, and that she sent it to his sister. He grabbed my hat, ripped it off with some hair, then grabbed my throat and threw me. I had grabbed my knife before we left, for almost no reason other than, I feel like something might happen. It's always advised to not escalate, but, you know, when this guy punched my mom and threw her down the bank after taking the phone, I didn't care. What should or shouldn't I do? I was ready to kill for real. For the only time in my life so far, going through how to level the playing field with this guy and a tiny knife. I told him what I had, and that I would cut him if he touched my mother again, and he focused on me. I jogged back and he came to me, and every time he looked back, I would reiterate what I'd do. My mother told me to run, and I told her to get to the car, and she did. Then I let him get distracted, and I ran around him. Almost got hit by a car that was speeding on the interstate, then made it to the car. Waited for her to start it before I got in and drove to the police station. He was apprehended a few hours later, 2 felony charges, one for choking his wife, and the second one assaulting an officer. We call the police when we see people in crashes now. I still have nightmares of what could have happened if I decided to use it or if he had gotten to me. I still put my keys in between my fists whenever I'm walking at night, and someone's nearby. I've never had to imagine what it would be like to cut someone or see them bleed. My mother still breathes faster every time we drive by that spot. This has been a PSA. I am a waitress at a local Italian restaurant that also does deliveries and pickups. One day, I would say a year ago, a man came into my place to carry an order. A girl I work with noticed him walking up to the door and asked me if I could take care of him. I said yes, not really thinking anything of it, and she walked back into the kitchen. He came in, and I could see why she had asked me to serve him. He immediately gave me the creeps. He was an older man, short and stout, wearing a big coat and a winter hat. He reeked like someone who had smoked an entire pack of cigarettes while walking through piles of cow poo. Thinking of it now in my apartment all alone, I can still smell him. What really scared me was the way he stared into my face. Chin turned down towards his chest, looking up at me through his eyebrows. The stare made me feel like he was thinking of every possible way to torture me. He didn't say much, just sort of growled his order of me. He paid and waited behind the counter for his pizza to take home. He would pace with his hands locked behind his back, while never shaking that stare. Even when he would turn to pace the other way, he never shook his glance away from me even for a second. Being that I'm working behind this counter, I can't really go anywhere in case someone calls or comes to get their order. So I just stood there, waiting for the clock for his order to be done so he could leave. Once he was gone, I asked my co-worker if she knew anything about him, and why she wanted me to take care of him. She told me that he gives her the creeps, and that he was a registered offender, but never went into the details of his charges. And honestly, I didn't even want to know. I still thought about him for the rest of the day and looked twice before getting into my car at the end of the night. But sure enough, I soon forgot about him. Unfortunately, it didn't last. He began to go in very frequently. At first, maybe once every other week, then every day. Every time he would order the same thing, and began his pacing with that burning stare. Every chance I would run to the kitchen or get away from the counter, I would. My co-worker would make jokes about how much he liked me, saying he has never stared that hard at any other worker in that way before. These jokes didn't make me feel better, to say the least. The jokes halted when we noticed his pattern. We noticed that he only comes in when I would be working. We started to suspect that he recognized my car. I never had the same schedule, but I always parked in the same spot in our very open parking lot, so you'd always be able to tell who was there if you knew their cars. The shifts that I would work were a little strange as well. There was a very, very dead time at the day where we would cut half the staff, giving us a break for a few hours long. He began to come in sometimes twice a day I was working. He would come in while I would work in my morning shift and then come again from my evening shift. Or maybe it was just a crazy coincidence. Nevertheless, it freaked me the hell out. One night after working a double shift on a Saturday, I had walked out to my old car which I never locked. 3 out of the 4 doors on my car were broken in some way, so it's easiest to just keep them unlocked at all times. And I could admit, that car was a piece of crap. No one would have dared steal it, so I never worried about it. Until this particular night I got into my car and immediately noticed the stench. My car reeked exactly like the man. That same smell of non-menthol cigarettes and cow poo was around me. I had completely convinced the man had been in my car that day. Since then I had someone escort me to my car every night, and I haven't seen that man in the last year. I hope you take your business elsewhere, creep. Let's never meet again. This happened a few years ago when I was bartending in college. I was coming home down a stretch of divided highway at 3 a.m. when I noticed a car heading towards me in the wrong lane. I doubted myself at first and thought the car was on the other side of the highway. But sure enough, a white Ford sedan passed me at a really high speed, at least 90. It's worth noting for later that I was also driving a white Ford sedan. I was used to drunk drivers/idiots in the middle of the night, so I pulled to the side of the road to let him pass. I had a moment of clarity and thought to call the police, thinking this person could hurt themselves or someone else. The dispatcher answered after telling them which road and exit mile marker I was at, and told them they would send a car. The police station was only a few exits away, so I figured they would send somebody and I would just drive home. As I headed back onto the highway, I noticed some lights a few miles behind me. I live in a more rural part of southeastern Pennsylvania, and traffic at 3 a.m. tends to be truckers and cops. The car gained on me as I was getting close to speed, so I stayed in the right lane and waited to be passed. Instead, they flipped on their high beams, making it uncomfortable to drive, and rode my tailgate. At this point, I thought I was going to be pulled over by the police. I drove a white Ford sedan and had just called about a different white Ford sedan. So I grabbed my registration from my glove box, when suddenly the car behind me audibly slammed on the brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway. They must have shut off their car because the lights went out, and I saw what looked to be the same Ford sedan from earlier. Still, I thought it may have been a police car, as they had a roof rack, and it could have looked like I had reached for my gun in my glove box or something. I panicked and called 911 for a second time and asked the dispatcher if they had sent a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher was a little curt with me and assured me that they had sent someone. "Sir, we've sent a trooper out to find the car." "Okay, I only ask because someone is following me and acting super weird. It could be a cop, and I think I freaked them out by getting my registration." "Are you getting pulled over?" "No, they didn't turn on their lights." "Let me try to get the trooper we sent out." As she was talking again, the car sped up towards me and stopped inches from my bumper. Again, their high beams were on me again and they slammed their brakes. I told the dispatcher, "I'm pretty sure it's not the police behind me." The car sped to my bumper again and turned their high beams on, this time laying on the horn. Hearing this, the dispatcher asked me what was happening. "What's going on?" "Did you honk me?" "No, that's the car behind me again." "I don't think it's a cop." "I'll try to get the trooper again, but I don't think that is him behind you." For some reason, this is what shook me. Before that, I was thinking I was getting pulled over and maybe a ticket. Up until then, I was going at the speed limit and trying to avoid getting pulled over. I told the dispatcher, "I don't care if I'm getting pulled over. I'm speeding, and if they put their lights on, then I'll pull over." I started to accelerate, and the person behind me kept up with me. The speed limit was 55, and they kept on my bumper the entire time. But this time they were swerving. I tried to signal for an exit and bail out, and they followed. At the next exit, I took the off-ramp and continued onto the on-ramp, and the car behind me followed the whole time. I thought I was about to go to Wawa, a convenience store / gas station that's pretty much the only populated place in southeastern Pennsylvania at 3 a.m. But the dispatcher thought it would be unsafe. She was calm and talking to another person, trying to send the police to me. The other person, maybe a supervisor, asked if I could drive to the police station. Realizing that I was one exit away, I told her I was going there, and said that she would have the troopers meet me outside. As I pulled off the exit, the car followed me. I blew a few red lights trying to get to the police station, and the car tried to pull into the other lane to pass me or pull up alongside me. Once the police station was in view, I put on my turn signal and the car slammed on its brakes again, turned off their lights and turned into the parking lot. The story kind of ends anticlimactically, as I pulled into the police station and met the troopers. 2 of them went out to find the car and I stayed with the 3rd. I thanked the dispatcher and her supervisor, and the straight trooper escorted me home after taking a statement from me. I was never called to follow or testify, so I can only assume the person didn't get caught. I was at a mate's house spending the night when I was in middle school. As expected, we'd stay up all hours, which didn't matter most of the time, except the bathroom was right near his parents' room. About the only time we'd get in trouble was when someone would wake them up when nature called. To avoid this, we'd go out the basement door and just pee in the woods. The door stayed unlocked most of the time because we'd managed to lock ourselves out more than once. This was also compounded by the fact that we all wandered out to find something to do in the woods on a regular basis. This night his older brother was home and kept barging in the basement door and raining chaos from above, so we decided to lock the door to deter him. Not that it would really have kept him out, but at least he'd have to use the key, and in doing so it would take the fun out of barging in. About midnight, we hear the handle jiggling, and I didn't think too much of it, figuring it was his brother. After about 5 minutes of on and off handle fondling, we finally hit the door and yell for him to stop, and are met with quiet. There's no response. No more clattering of the handle, and that's great, so we can move on, right? Well, about 10 minutes later it started again, and the process repeated. This went on for about 2 hours until finally, after telling him to stop, we just said screw it and ignored it. He continued for about half hour after our last attempt for him to stop, and then just gave up. Well, fast forward to about 9 AM, we were just stirring and one of my mates had to go to the bathroom. If you've ever had a sleepover like that, there are bodies strewn wherever there's a space, and once the first person starts walking around, it kind of stirs the nest. We all started stretching and making our way to relieve ourselves of the soda that we'd been binging on the night before, and as I walk out, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me, and noticed it felt rough. After looking at it, I saw the space around the keyhole was all but destroyed. There were giant scratch marks on every surface, and the metal guides were bent and skewed. I asked my friend that lived there what happened, and he said it was the first time he'd noticed it. Not really wanting to get blamed for something his brother did, we went upstairs and told his parents about the night before. After his dad went down to see what we were talking about, he went completely white and ran upstairs to call the cops. Evidently, someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all inside. That actually happened to me more than once on different occasions. What completely freaked me out about this time was the person knew we were there, and we knew someone was trying to get in. So, he repeatedly tried to force his way inside. God knows what sort of person that was, or what they had in mind for us. This happened in 2005. I was just about to turn 20, between my first and second year of uni, and I found a summer job at a local video rent store. I miss those. It was open 8 AM to 1 AM, so whoever was working afternoon shift had to close up, and was located in a calm downtown area, only a couple of blocks away from the city centre, and whenever I had to close I always took a taxi home, so I never had a reason to worry about my safety. After the first months I had already learned who the regulars were, and because I was friendly and chatty, I started feeling in my element soon enough. I knew who were the good clients, who were the ones who always tended to be late to return DVDs and tried to evade the fines. There was, however, one client in particular who always gave me the creeps from the first time I saw him. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, and whenever he came to rent or return, he was always kind of hostile towards me, even in mundane exchanges. The sulky and rather sarcastic way he spoke to me gave me that vibe. I didn't take it personally, but let's just say he wasn't my favorite customer. So imagine my surprise when one day I come to work and my colleague tells me that one of our clients has asked about me and when I start work. She was teasing me, that he must like me, and I couldn't really think of who said client was because she didn't remember his name. When he came to ask about me, he didn't rent nor return a DVD, so she couldn't access his account. She leaves, I start my shift, and it was really busy that day, so I quickly forgot all about it. But then, in the evening, when it was less busy at around 8, guess who shows up? The Grump. At this point, I still haven't made the connection in my mind, and I groan inwardly thinking, ugh, why always on my shifts? Then instead of going through the aisles to pick a movie, he heads straight for the counter, where I am, and starts asking me questions like what my name is, where and what I study, if I have a boyfriend. And I'm trying to be polite and casual, even though he is, once again, talking to me with that hostile vibe, which didn't really make any sense to me. Then he starts going away, mid-sentence, but suddenly turns back to me and declares that he will come pick me up tonight after my shift is over and will walk me home. I stand there completely puzzled and weirded out. Then I try to politely dismiss that offer by saying that I normally call a cab, so there is no need. But he doesn't even hear me. He stubbornly says, "Tonight I will walk you home. I will be there when the store closes." Now after he left, I felt relieved and tried to laugh it off and think nothing of it. However, the later it got, the more creeped out I started to feel. I was wondering, what if he really does come? What would I do then? So, I decided to risk closing off early. And at 11:30 p.m, I've gradually started the process of finishing the shift, when suddenly I see a few guys passing by the store on the street, and I recognize an ex-classmate of mine. I quickly run outside and shout his name. He comes back and we greet each other with a hug. We used to be friends in high school, and I tell him about the creep and that I was scared. My friend Theo says he was going with his friends for drinks, but he'll make sure to return around closing time to see me home. I exhale in relief, because I no longer have to close early, something that made me quite anxious to do as I hate breaking the rules, even though it was unlikely I would have been caught. And as I get back inside arranging DVDs in a much calmer state of mind, the clock goes on, and 12:30 comes around. I start washing the floor and thinking I might have overreacted by getting so worked up about this whole situation, and that maybe the guy was just a harmless grump who wouldn't act on what he said. Then I hear the bell jingle, indicating that someone had entered the store. I go to the counter and stop in my tracks. I see him, the guy, slowly approaching me with a determined stare. I start shaking all over, look outside, but the streets are empty. So I try to remain calm and not give any nervousness away in case I trigger him somehow. I continue finishing my shift when he asks if I'm ready, and once again repeat that I don't need to be walked home because I have other plans. This seems to annoy him, and he asks what kind of plans, since I didn't mention anything before, and my facade slips a little when I indignantly explain that it's not any of his business, but I made those plans after he last came. So I ask him if he doesn't intend to rent to please leave and allow me to finish up and close. He doesn't even budge, just stubbornly stands there and says, "Yes, you have no plans. I will walk you home when you finish." Now at this point my treacherous chin starts to tremble a bit because I'm on the verge of tears. I feel angry, frustrated and scared. I'm looking at the clock every few minutes and contemplate my options in case Theo forgets about me and doesn't fulfill his promise to return. It was 12:58 now. I was still stalling, seriously wondering if the situation warranted a call to the police. I was anxious to call them anyway, because I didn't want to trigger the guy, but also I was afraid to be scolded for bothering the police with insignificant things. That was my young, stupid brain. That's when I hear the doorbell ding again, and we both turn to see Theo walk inside. I had never been more glad and relieved to see him, so I put down what I'm holding and run to him. He slides a protective arm around my shoulder and asks if I'm ready, then looks at the creep in that non-verbal, defiant male way of saying, "You got a problem, bro?" Now this would be a good time to mention that Theo was a tall, bulky guy who did sports, so he was not someone you wanted to mess with, in comparison to the other guy who was rather slim. The creep looks at us for a few seconds as if weighing in his options, but then resigns and leaves. But before he goes out the door, he turns to me with a vicious glare and says, "This isn't over." Theo starts for the door, and the guy quickly left. He walked me home and warned me to speak to my manager and colleagues and warn them about him. The next day I told them everything, and I had to start taking only morning shifts for a while. A few weeks later, one of my colleagues said the creepster appeared and asked about me again. Mind you, he asked when I would be working the evening shift. They told him I only do mornings, and he seemed disappointed. He then started ranting, said that I led him on and then rejected him, and my colleagues told him that she actually knows what happened, so it would be best if he leaves, and leaves me alone, unless he wants trouble with the police. That seemed to work, because since then he never returned to the video store, at least not while I was working there. I don't know what his intentions were, but boy am I glad for Theo being there at the right place at the right time. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't have been. I was on a road trip with a buddy, and one stop we had to make was to visit his mother's grave. It was in Colorado in February, so the whole cemetery was covered in a few inches of snow. We talked to the caretaker, and she pointed us in the general direction. His mum's grave marker and those around hers were the metal plaque kid, flush with the ground, so no good references. We shoveled snow for a while, being as respectful as we could, and kept walking past this patch of snow that looked like it was made by some birds, after they'd rolled around in it. When we looked at the snow patch from the right angle, it looked like a human figure with a hand extending. We shrugged it off and followed the direction it was pointing. Not 5 minutes later, we found his mother's grave, right where the figure was pointing to. Last August, I got a pet hamster. Her name was Halo, and I loved her very much. I hadn't had a pet of my own before, so this was very exciting for me. She was always a very observant little ham. She was always very curious and inquisitive. Heck, if she'd only been a boy, I'd have named her George because of how curious she was. Sadly, one day, something fell in her cage, and she started acting funny. I noticed she was very lethargic, stopped drinking entirely, and my mum worried that she might have come down with wet tail, which is a deadly disease in hamsters that can kill them sometimes, in as little as 24 hours. It was a stressful period of time for one of two reasons. First of all, I was worried about taking her to the vet, because it would put her under even more stress, and decided that when she got up for the night, if she didn't drink, I would euthanize her at home with CO2. However, my dad decided it wasn't a good idea, and my choices were to let her suffer at home or take her to the vet. I was a stupid kid, and decided to sleep on it and let my poor hamster suffer, and I regret it to this day. Now, the second reason, that's where it got scary. Once she fell ill, the knocking started. I was going to bed after hand-feeding Halo some carrots, as they had high water content. I rolled over and started getting comfortable, to go to sleep and let the darkness take control. But then I heard a knock at my door. I said, "Come in," as it was probably one of my parents coming in to talk to me to say goodnight. No reply, no door opening. I thought maybe they couldn't hear me over the noise of my air purifier, which I also used as white noise, as my house is very old and creaky. So I yelled louder, that they could enter, but still heard no answer. I heard the knock again. My mum is hard of hearing, so I suppose it was possible that she didn't hear me. I opened the door, but no one was there. At this point I realized it was my dad playing a trick on me, which he enjoys doing every once in a while, although I did find it strange he'd do this during such a stressful time, and said into the hallway, "Dad?" There was no reply. "Dad, I know it's you, you can come out." Still no reply. I started getting scared. "Dad? Please come out, you're scaring me." It isn't funny anymore. Now, if I ever said that what he was doing was upsetting me, he'd immediately stop. And it definitely couldn't have been my mum, because she hated getting scared, and had never tried to scare me. I ran back to my room, locked the door, and turned to look at my poor Hammy, who was curled in a ball. 5 minutes later, the knocking started again, and this time I realized the sound was coming from my window. That didn't ease my mind at all, as anyone could easily shatter the glass, so I hid under my covers and prayed. The next morning I woke up and was dismayed to see Halo's condition hadn't changed at all. I went downstairs for the day and tried taking care of her. When I went to bed that night I heard the knocking once more. This time I was genuinely freaked out, even more so than I had been the other night. I turned on another white noise machine and tried to go to sleep. By the next morning I was so overtired, Halo started looking a bit better. And that was probably the only reason my sanity lasted. The knocking didn't stop that night. 5 seconds would pass and then I'd hear it again. I went to sleep downstairs that night. Fortunately, whatever was doing it did not follow. The next morning, Halo was even worse. She wasn't even moving. We took her to the vet and she died that day. Somehow she had broken her back and got paralyzed from the neck down. We still have no idea how it happened. That night the knocks stopped and never came back. Sometimes I still hear her wheel squeaking. My dad said it might have been a sign. It was the weirdest and scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and hopefully I never hear those knocks again. In the summer of 1995, I was 11. Sleeping late home alone at around 11 a.m. while my parents were at work. I got woken up by the doorbell, so instinctively I hurried up down the corridor, but before I rushed to open the door as I normally would, I remembered the many times my mum scolded me for opening the door without asking who it is first, or looking through the peephole to make sure it was safe to open, especially after some previously creepy experiences having already taken place at this point. So I asked, "Who is it?" But all I heard was some unintelligible mumbles. So I thought about it and brought a chair up, stepped on it, and looked through the peephole. We lived in an apartment building, and on the right of our door was the elevator, and then the staircase. Since the staircase windows were on the far left corner, there was not enough natural light up there to help me see who it was. I just saw a male with some colourful t-shirts standing outside. I repeated the question, and then strained to hear the answer. He said he was looking for Miss Marjorie. That's my mother's maiden name. And I replied that she was at work. To give you some context, both of my parents are doctors. And I don't know if that sounds weird for the US or the rest of the Western world, but in Eastern Europe in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon for grateful patients to sometimes stop by, wanting to give them thanks by bringing fresh fruit or vegetables or produce from their gardens, especially those with which my parents had helped but couldn't pay. So the man said he was bringing something for my mum, except even in the murky light I could see his hands were empty. I asked what it was, and he said he left the package at the stairs. At this point I'm starting to get this uneasy feeling that something isn't right. So I decide to be cautious and lie to him that I don't have keys, and said my parents were at work and they've told me to not open the door for strangers. So when they come back, they can help him. He starts to get agitated and said he can't wait that long, and then says he's actually bringing meat so that it would get spoiled in the heat if it's left outside. I begin to hesitate, because what if he's telling the truth? Will I get in trouble for letting the meat spoil? But then I look through the peephole again and see his hair, which means he has his ear pressed to the door and he's listening in. This spooked me, so I said that I was sorry and couldn't help him, and asked him to come back later when I wasn't alone. He once again said he wouldn't have time to come back later, so he offers to leave and says he will leave the package at the stairs. So when he's gone, I won't be afraid to open the door and retrieve it myself. I keep quiet and intently observe him as he goes down the stairs and makes noise climbing down. And then I freeze, because in the silence that ensued, I was just about to really open the door and check, when I saw his t-shirt sleeve behind the corner of the stairs. He was hiding, probably hoping that I would open the door thinking he were gone, when in fact, he was preparing to, what, pounce on me, break into our apartment? Maybe something worse. I got so scared I froze and just kept on watching, standing on the chair behind the door, and finally after what seemed like hours but was probably maybe just 10 minutes, I heard him descend the stairs. I still didn't open the door. I called my mum's hospital but she couldn't be put through, so I waited for them to come back home in the afternoon. They both got worried but proud of me that I did the right thing. A few hours later, all the kids from the building and I are at the little square playground/bench area in front of it. It was buzzing with kids running around and grandparents, so it was very safe. My best friend Nina and I were sitting on one of the benches when suddenly a strange man approaches us and stands next to the bench and asks our name. I hesitantly say what it is, although my heart starts to beat faster as I recognize the voice. It was the man from the morning. This time I'm not alone, so I instinctively press myself closer to Nina when he says, "Well, I'm bringing something for Harry. But it's in the car and I've parked it there on the street. Will you come bring it to me?" For context, Harry is my father. Encouraged by my friend's presence and all the people around, I say to him that actually my dad is home, so if he waits there I'll go get him, and he could help him bring whatever he wants from the car, as I'm too little and can't carry heavy things. The moment I said it, the guy got quiet and then quickly began walking away. Not running, just very quickly walking. My friend, who already knew about what happened this morning, and I ran to my apartment and told my dad. He ran in his shorts to chase after the guy, but of course, he was long gone. My dad started asking away then, as once again, something typical for Eastern European countries, the grandma sitting on the balconies and the benches, looking out at everyone and everything that's going on, like a living security system. But no one has noticed anything except one grandma, an old lady living alone on the first floor, who says that a guy approached her earlier while she was sitting on her balcony and started asking about our family, then tried to ask for money to pay for the meat he was bringing. And he told her that my parents have purchased it from him. She told him she has no money, but stupidly gave him a lot of information like my name. We never heard anything about the guy, but thank God. Those questions are still puzzling me though. What did he want? Why did he say my mum's name? But then he said he was bringing something for my dad? Was he actually focused on me? Would he have abducted me? Whatever the answer, I hope to never meet him. I also remember that when school started after that summer, there was another situation that seemed weird and possibly dangerous. I was coming back from school and saw my friends gathered in front of the apartment building, but in the entrance furthest away from the one I live in. I was talking to them when I heard my mum calling me. I turned and saw she was heading to work towards the bus stop, but she never called me to go to her, and when I did, she told me she wants me to immediately go home. I grumbled, but obliged. So from my point of view, what happened was this. I reached our entrance of the building and opened the door, when I feel someone coming close behind me, but I don't turn and think nothing of it. Then I start climbing the stairs quickly because I was afraid to take the elevator alone. But I hear that there are equally fast footsteps following up behind me. And just when I was fiddling with my keys about to unlock the door, I hear my mum's extremely worried voice shouting my name from downstairs, which startled me. And then the footsteps stopped right before the person reached my floor, and they started coming back down. Then my mum climbs to our floor, hugs me, and we lock the door, and she tells me what actually happened. She's going to work but sees me talking to my friends. Then she looks around and sees a creepy older man standing near us and staring at us kids. While we are all oblivious to his presence, she calls my name and tells me to immediately go home. She turns and starts for the bus stop once I head home, but then an impending sense of dread consumes her and she turns to look back. seeing that the guy is no longer where he was but actually following me, and in very few movements sees he enters the building after me and disappears. My mum begins to run in a sheer panic, reaches the entrance and shouts my name, and then she hears his footsteps back down, and then when he reaches the ground floor he passes by my mum and says he gave her such an evil, menacing glare as if he wanted to strangle her for preventing his intentions. She said alarm bells rang in her head and her whole body was full of adrenaline, ready to fight if she must, because she felt that I was in real danger. Do you think it was the same guy? I never got a chance to see him, and my mum didn't know what the guy from before looked like, so who knows? All I know is that I never want to meet either of them again. This happened to my wife's friend. One day, she was driving home from work in a quiet area when an unmarked police car sped up behind her and began flashing his blues and signaling for her to pull over. To this day, she doesn't know why, but something wasn't right, and after a call to her boyfriend, he gave her a contact for our local police station. She rang the number and asked about an unmarked police car wanting to pull her over. The person on the phone did a quick check or possibly contacted a dispatcher, and they were told to keep driving but stay calm. Within 4 minutes, 4 marked cars came speeding up behind, and before she knew what was happening, boxed the unmarked car in and forced it to stop. The dispatcher told her to drive around the corner and to stop, and as it turned out, the guy was being hunted by the police for pretending to be an officer to get young women to pull over when he has them at gunpoint to do all sorts of insidious things to them. I am a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. I live alone in an apartment in a building where there are only students. I'm 22 and enjoy a peaceful life. I live in a relatively calm and good neighborhood, and the only noises I've ever heard are the trams or parties in buildings, since there are plenty of students here. One night around 10, I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come into the door must have a key. Call me or ring me at the door so that I can open it for them, and then let them into my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just hear a knock on my door one day. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As I told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, and I could also take care and defend myself in case anything happened, but this time for some reason, I had a bad feeling. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I'd finished my assignment. However, the knocking continued. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave and I'd finish my assignments. However, the knocking persisted for 30 seconds, so I yell out, "Yeah?" in English, and the person knocking didn't say a word. I say in English again, "Who is it?" The voice answers in English, "It's Uber Eats," which is weird because Dutch, always speaking Dutch, and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have access to this floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was someone coming from Uber Eats apparently. But the issue is I didn't order Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar in case it was a prank or neighbor pulling a joke. It was also a deep voice, at least 40, and definitely a smoker. "I didn't order anything. You must have the wrong address." A few seconds later, the knocking continues, and the same voice says, "I'm pretty sure you did. I have an order under your name." I start panicking. I look around and pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting louder and fiercer. I check if the door is locked, and it wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him, and my front door was the only thing keeping me from him. I'm glad it didn't open from the outside, as you need a key to open it, even if it's not locked. I step back and ask again, "What's the name?" He seemed to be thinking for a few seconds. Then a final knock occurs. It was loud, and it translated some of the anger and frustration. Finally, I hear him descend the emergency stairs next to my apartment. The steps were heavy-footed, and clearly the person was in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what he would have done to me if I'd have opened the door. I still don't understand how he got through the original 2 doors, and why did he specifically come to the last apartment on the 3rd floor? Did he try others before? I posted about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building, and no one saw anything suspicious. No one opened the door for anyone. Anyway, I'm lucky for my instinct telling me not to open the door, and I'm glad that I listened. This happened about 3 years ago, right at the height of Pokemon Go's popularity. I played it regularly with my fiancé Luke. We decided to get clever, and instead of walking to make our eggs grow or whatever, I would just drive around the residential streets slowly at 15 miles an hour. We always drove the same path and did this several times. At the time we lived in a very small, 1 traffic light town. The town was primarily low-income families, and we usually played Pokemon at about 10 to 11 p.m., as did several other locals. Without other entertainment, it was a fairly popular game around town. This night in particular, I'm driving at the normal path with Luke. We're catching sick Pokemon left and right and hatching eggs like crazy. We pause in the water department's parking lot to catch our 217th Ekans, and drive for 10 more minutes and park next to an empty lot. Across the street is a normal residential landscape with houses and whatnot. I'm catching my first Pikachu and am stoked as hell when some guy drives by in a beat-up SUV, slows down and asks me if I'm okay. I smiled and flashed my phone screen and told him we were playing Pokemon, when he said something like, "Okay, have a good one," but he seemed weird. So we leave and make our last stop around the neighborhood, pausing as we get to various Pokemon. And after about 15 minutes later, we're back in the empty parking lot, because there's a few more to catch. Suddenly, the house across the street starts pointing beams of light at me, very small, which is strange, so Luke and I noped out of there. As soon as we did, the beat-up SUV is behind me again. I didn't even see where he came from, and I turn onto the main road to head home, and I didn't even realize anything was wrong at first. He pulls up next to me and I can only see a male driving and a female passenger. The driver is shining a blinding light at me through the window as we drive. At this point I'm simply pissed. I keep asking Luke why this guy has a problem, and I'm telling him to tell the guy to get lost, all the while getting ever more scared. I'm a fairly confident person, but not a confident driver, and I'd no idea who these people were or why they were doing this to us. But I do know that it's not the same guy that asked if we were okay earlier. I don't want to drive home because I don't want to lead them to my house, but I had no idea what to do, and decided to drive to the police station, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty and the lights were off. We have 2 police officers, so they both must have been out on patrol. I was shook. I was raised in a large city, so tiny town living and no police at a station was a very foreign concept to me. I had no clue what to do, so I drove to the little hospital and managed to lose them. My fiancé and I immediately changed seats without speaking, and we sat there for 15 seconds and then pulled out. He's behind us again, and he's aggressive, so I called 911 at this point and began crying to dispatch, telling them there's a crazy guy following us. At this point, Luke is flying through the town at random, running red lights, speeding at 70 plus in residential areas, tearing through people's lawns, and this was seriously as insane as it sounds. Everywhere he went, the follower went too. Every time we sped up, so would he. We had no idea what he wanted, but we knew he wanted to hurt us. We could just feel it. At one point we're tearing through yards in my car, and the guy manages to box us in. I'm still on the phone with 911 and we're stuck between his car and a couple of trees. Immediately upon stopping, the guy jumps out, as does the female passenger and 2 very large male passengers in the back seat. Luke immediately pulls out his gun, points at them and screams, "Get back, now!" They all bolt into their vehicle and take off. I'm absolutely shaking and sobbing at this point, talking to 911, and the lady finally asks me where I want the cops to meet me. I tell her the local gas station. We're there within 20 seconds, as were the cops. This town is seriously so small. I don't know how the cops didn't see us or intervene while we destroyed dozens of yards at midnight and drove extremely fast and recklessly. Seconds after we pull in, so does the SUV, and the guy jumps out and begins to rush my car, but the cops stop him. They talk to him for a while, and we're just sitting in our car shaking. The older cop finally walks over to us and says, "So did one of you pull a gun on him tonight?" We were shocked. That was the only thing he asked us. We told him yes and explained everything. The cops went to speak to him again, came back, and basically said the guys thought we were casing his home because he kept seeing our vehicle pass it. The cops told us we were lucky. He decided not to press charges because Luke pulled his gun. My car had decent damage from driving through trees and bushes and stuff, scratched up. Pretty sure the guy wanted to beat our asses. And the cops tell us that we're lucky. We're so shaken and scared. We didn't argue anything and left when they allowed us to. But not before they ran all our info and made us feel like criminals, like we were childish and stupid for playing Pokemon. The cops openly laughed at us. We went home and stayed up literally all night long, taking turns peeking out our window, as we were convinced they were going to drive around, find my car and harass us. The next day we had high-tech security installed. I've since seen the guy and the girl several times. I worked at the school and they had young children. I'd never seen or interacted with them prior to this day or after, but I also know who they were, so I'm glad I don't live there anymore. I also never played Pokemon Go after that night. I should also mention that I understand why the guy thought what he did, but I don't think his reaction was remotely justifiable.
This is what happened to me this month. I woke up one morning to a nail in my tire. Great. I looked for the nearest repair shop and made my way there. I was very happy to find a place that wasn't by appointment and was within 5 blocks from my apartment. When I got there, I was greeted by a nice-looking man in a suit. He was shorter than me, had a very short beard and was covered in tattoos. I mean, he had full sleeves and some of his head. He wasn't one of those bad-looking tattooed covered guys though. Anyway, they seemed to work for him. His name was Jake. I told Jake about my plans for my car and my future in the mechanic field. These are all my usual topics for small talk. His eyes lit up, and he said if I ever wanted any hands-on experience, he would be happy to teach me. He wrote his name on a business card and handed it to me. I had worked in a shop previously, but the boss was old, horribly sexist, and outright scary. I had guessed that Jake was in his late 20s to early 30s, and I was so excited because he was young. It's not common to see people that are young that are the boss, and I went home and told my boyfriend all about my experience. I thought about it for a few days, and then called and offered to work Wednesday mornings in the shop. The first Wednesday was uneventful. I watched one of the mechanics work all day and didn't learn anything that I didn't already know. Jake kept checking on me during the day and gave me his personal number so that I could contact him without having to go through the shop landline. The next Wednesday started off like a blast. The first hour I just watched the same tech. Jake came into the shop and asked me if I wanted to run some errands with him. Of course I said yes, because it was hot. I was wearing jeans, and I knew the van could have air conditioning. Jake is the kind of guy that rambles a lot, so we went through topics really fast. We talked a lot about business at first, but then it got really weird. He started talking about the girls he was hooking up with and living with his ex. It didn't really faze me because this is how most of the boys in the industry talk. He bought me food and on our way back home, gave me a $20 bill for coming on his errands. He started leaving subtle comments about my boyfriend, and that he should be giving me money, buying me stuff, and that I shouldn't rush into marriage because I was so young. Come Friday, I was extremely bored, and didn't want to do my schoolwork, so I texted Jake to see if I could come hang out at the shop, even though I wasn't wearing shop clothes. I was wearing a semi-long skirt and a long crop top. When I got there, he said, "Do you want to make some money today?" I said, "Yeah," and he led me to the back office. It was slow that day, so I was just doing odd jobs around the office and reception desk. He kept saying how much he liked my skirt, which I would like to add showed nothing. Okay, weird. Throughout the day, I kept catching Jake staring down my skirt. Men will be men, I thought. He kept commenting on my outfit, saying things like, "I didn't know you were hiding all that under your shop clothes. Your skirt's gonna make it hard for me to stand up in a minute." At this point, I was just trying to get the job done so that I could make money and go home, and was starting to get really nervous as the comments escalated. "God, it makes me wonder what else you're hiding under there." I responded, "Jake, I have a boyfriend," which he definitely knew. That's when he said, and I quote, "Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to put it in you, but, like, can I see?" Anger bubbled up in me, and I yelled, "No, you can't speak to me like that." I finished my job to get a whopping $30. Great, all that for nothing. The next morning, Jake called me and told me that his boss came by the shop and got in trouble for having me there, so he told me I shouldn't come back for a while. I was heartbroken and confused. A week went by and I was having trouble sleeping. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was I really fired for being a liability, or was it because I said no to him? I called Jake on Sunday and asked. He promised me that I wasn't fired because I said no to him, and said that he would have told me if he'd fired me for that reason. Then began ranting and talking about how he went to prison and doesn't play games like that. I told him that what he had said to me made me feel really uncomfortable, and he went on to say that I could still go and hang out whenever I wanted. He was talking about a coffee shop nearby and a restaurant, and was like he was trying to get me to come out with him. After he fired me? Okay, weird. Like, did you not just hear what I said? That night as I was trying to fall asleep, I felt this overwhelming need to check the Megan's Law website. In California, we have a website that shows all registered sex offenders. All that I knew was his name and the town he lived in. I must have read about 300 profiles when a face caught my attention. His face. I shook as I clicked on the profile, which read, "Conviction 2008, released 2010. Offense, lewd or lascivious acts with a child under 14. Jake was 20, the child was under 14. Jake was a freaking child molester, but it didn't stop there. I panicked and went down the rabbit hole, finding pages and pages of criminal charges dating all the way back to 2005. He had been arrested a lot of times and done really horrible things. There were reports of stabbing, fights, gang-related offenses, and obviously, child molestation. I can't believe I got in the car with him alone. I worked with him alone. I've talked to him. How did I not know? I'm really glad that I got away from him when I did. I've never been more happy to have been fired in my life. So, with that being said, Jake, let's never meet again."
I used to deliver hot shop freights across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who's driven across North Dakota knows that it's incredibly flat, like really flat, and there also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road as far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came into a complete stop, but they didn't move an inch. I was about to back up and check up on them, when I remembered a story that an old grey-beard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road liars, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the crap out of the driver and steal the vehicle, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked towards the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old greybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, my teeth, and my life. This happened a few months ago. It was a few days after Christmas, and my mum had asked me and my girlfriend to house sit and watch the dogs for her while she went on vacation for a week with her boyfriend. We agreed, and the first few days were pretty uneventful. My mum's house is on the edge of a rural upstate New York town, so really the only big thing that happens is road work. It was probably the third night there. My girlfriend and I were on the couch, she was on her phone and I was playing Pokemon Shield on Switch. It was probably around midnight when suddenly we hear footsteps from outside. Someone with really big and heavy boots had stepped up onto the porch. The way my mum's house is laid out is that there's a couch against the wall with windows on either side of it. On the other side of the wall is the front porch, so this guy was right behind us. He stomped around some and then got really close to the window on the left side of the couch and grunted, "Ugh! Hell!" in a deep angry voice and stomped off. My girlfriend and I froze, but after 5 seconds of registering what had just happened, we got up and turned off all the lights in the house and went to the laundry room where no one would see us. After a little while, I decided to go out a different room and look out the window to see if we could turn any of the lights back on. When I look out of it though, I see this big burly guy shuffling down the sidewalk opposite our house. In his hands are a plastic bag. Keep in mind this is midnight in a rural backwater town, so none of these stories around. Keep in mind it's midnight in a rural backwater town, so none of the stores around are open for him to get one. The guy continues doing this awkward shuffle while holding this bag, then suddenly starts moving nimbly in an almost cartoony manner across the street towards the parking lot near my house and vanishes. I go back to the laundry room where my girlfriend is and tell her what I saw. I bring her back to the window as I was looking out to see if we can find him again, but he's still gone. We check other windows around the house to see if he's out any of those. My girlfriend is looking out a window on the other side of the house when she says she sees him but he's walking away. We try to collect and discuss whether or not we should call the cops, when suddenly we hear knocks on the door on the other side of the house. We race to the door, and we can hear the doorknob jiggling. Thankfully it was locked. One of my mum's dogs starts barking and going insane. He's a small rescue dog that growls at anything foreign. He has a loud, ear-piercing bark, so I think that scared him away. We called my mum and asked her what to do. We debated calling the cops, but cops in our area are notorious for not really doing their job, so we decided against it. My mum also encouraged us not to because she thought it was just some drunk and or high person that didn't know what they were doing. While this wouldn't be the first time someone showed up drunk at the door in the middle of the night, gotta love small towns, right? I don't think he was. I don't know what the guy's intentions were, but I'm glad I didn't find out. This happened back in the late 1980s, when I was home one summer on break from college. About 2 years prior, my dad had purchased an old house with the intention of eventually tearing it down to build a new home. The house was built in 1916, and like most homes built in that era, it had a really unconventional floor plan. There was a central living room and a kitchen like any normal home, but the 3 bedrooms were more akin to a separate apartment. Each had its own separate outside entrance, a private bathroom, and a door that led to the common area living room, and a kitchen. Perhaps the place was originally intended to be a boarding house or something. I really didn't know. The other thing that was a little creepy about the house was that it was all wood. The ceilings, walls, and floors were all brown, and nothing was ever painted nor plastered. My dad was a pretty cool guy. While he was waiting for permits and financing, he let 3 of my friends live there for free in exchange for watching the place. They had a lot of parties, but my dad didn't care as long as none of the neighbors complained. I went to a few parties there myself when I was lucky enough to be home from college. Eventually 2 of my friends moved out, leaving my one buddy there to watch the mostly empty house on his own. He was not the type of person to be afraid of living alone in a half-empty house. In fact, he was fine with the situation. I'm at home one afternoon when the phone rings. It's my buddy, and he sounds terrified. He tells me to call the police and to meet him in front of the driveway of the house, but to under no conditions go in. I ask him why, and he tells me that there is a crazy clown in the house. Apparently he was sick with the man flu, in bed for the previous 2 days, when he finally felt well enough to go into the kitchen to get something to eat. He runs face to face with a crazy woman dressed in a clown suit, and makeup starts screaming at him. It was then that he ran out the house and called me in a panic from a nearby gas station. I called the police, and then drove over to the house, which was about 2 miles away, and find my buddy on the sidewalk out front, and he's very shaken up. I ask him to describe what he saw, and he keeps saying that there's a crazy clown woman in the house. I press for more specific details, and he describes her as dressed in a white clown suit with red makeup smeared all over her face. He's still a little sick, and looks really bad, and honestly, he's really freaking me out as well. There's no way in hell that I was going into that house to investigate the story. After what seems like an eternity, a cop shows up. My buddy tells him the exact same story. The cop then goes into the house while we wait outside, and after about 5 minutes, he emerges escorting a crazy clown woman who looks exactly as my friend described. She has wild, unkempt brown hair, wearing this weird baggy one-piece all-white body jumper suit that is really strangely styled. What is really disturbing though is her face. She had a tube of lipstick which she crudely spread red all over her cheeks in a failed attempt to make them look rosy. Although we were both freaked out, the cop thought it was hilarious. The clown woman claimed it was her house and then accused us of being on drugs and trespassing on her property. When the cop told her to get in the back of the squad car, she warned him that she had powerful friends in Tinseltown who would have him fired. When he comes back to talk to us, he tells us he can't arrest her for breaking and entering because the house is half abandoned. He said the best he could do was drive her a few blocks away and hope she didn't wander back. This, of course, freaks us out even more. Fortunately though, when they did a background check on her, it turns out she has an outstanding warrant and would be going to jail instead. That is the last time we saw her. When we go back into the house, we find all kinds of crazy stuff written on the kitchen cabinets in the same red lipstick that she rubbed all over her face. There was also some 10-day-old fish in the fridge that my friend never got around to eating that she cooked on the stove and ate. The really scary thing though was this crazy woman was in the same house with my friend for at least a day, while he was sick and semi-delirious in bed with a fever. She was probably harmless, but who knows what she could have done if she stumbled upon him while he was sleeping. His door was unlocked the entire time. Fortunately, she never did, as far as we know. One of the things she wrote on the cabinets in lipstick was her name. While I'm not allowed to disclose what it is, I googled it and found a mugshot that was taken of her some years later. So, creepy clown lady, let's not meet again. My life hasn't always been the best. A rough childhood and a string of horrible abusive relationships made life that much harder, and I was feeling as though I had hit rock bottom. The fall before college, I landed a job to save up on money and keep my mind occupied. December 2018, my job had recently laid out the plans for a company merge and was in desperate need to hire more help to make sure things went smoothly, both with the upcoming merge and the holiday season. I was about 3 months into this job, and at the same time very comfortable with the position and duties. My co-workers were very friendly, and though we could be classified as a dysfunctional family, we made it work. My boss had just hired a few more people, a couple of cashiers and a shift supervisor to get trained as quickly as possible and throw into the mess. All the new people seemed nice enough, and though I'm naturally a social person, I'm not very trusting. A week goes by and I'm put on night shifts with the new lead, and my first thought of him was, the guy seems pretty easygoing and harmless. But I was wrong. He seemed to be having a hard time adjusting, and to make him feel better, I would help him learn the job as best I could. He seemed friendly overall, always willing to help you if you needed it, and the regulars liked him. Everything was going smooth until my gut told me something was up. I personally wouldn't like to talk about myself because it makes me feel selfish, so my co-workers' knowledge of my personal life is limited to what I'll be doing after the shift, and that I had a younger brother who came into the store often, so when this man started to mention things, I never told anyone at the job unless it was necessary, as I was uneasy. My first paranoid thought was that he had found my Instagram, which at the time was public. I don't have other social media, but figured it was just that. Weeks go by, uneventful aside from the man making comments about his sex life to me and describing his ideal woman. He tries to befriend my little brother, a minor, and asks him to hang out with him sometimes. This man is in his 30s. My brother told me he didn't like the guy the moment he met him because he gave off serious creeper vibes. Maybe it was the inappropriate jokes, advances, abuses of power, talking bad about me, talking about him, or him constantly asking other employees where I was, even if I wasn't scheduled. But I started to feel very scared around him. I had co-workers come to me the day after their shifts with him, uncomfortable because the whole night he'd been going on about me when he barely knew me. He'd watch security cameras and call me from the office just to try and talk to me about the job and personal life. I didn't have a vehicle at the time, so my current partner, who was a saving grace, would pick me up from work. He had found out about my boyfriend. He threatened to beat him up on multiple occasions, as well as throwing things in my office when my boyfriend would pick me up from work. One night in particular, my brother got out from his job at the same time we closed and decided to swing by and pick me up. The psycho got in his car and followed us home. I was so scared I didn't sleep all night. I was terrified to work with him and asked my boss to throw me on morning shift so that I wouldn't have to see him. Thankfully he did, and I only had to see this man for a few moments as I was leaving to go home. After the merge, everyone went their own ways, and I haven't seen him since. But he has tried to contact me via social media recently, asking how I am and where I'm living. Because of him, I'm always watching my back, especially in my hometown. I'm paranoid he'll find me. I'm a 19-year-old female from Maryland. I don't live in Baltimore City, but right outside of it, and have friends that live there and find myself in the city quite often. Now, if you know anything about Baltimore, you've probably already made the decision to never go there. I thought I was used to it. I thought. My friend and I were driving to pick up another friend from a neighborhood we've never been to. My friend was giving me directions from her GPS, but we ended up on the wrong street. The streets in this city are very narrow, cars parked on both sides of the street makes it worse, and if you're lucky, it's a one-way street. Well, this street wasn't a one-way. There's a cop car, stopped with hazards on, going the same way as me but on the left side of the road. I'll be honest and say that I'm not the best driver, so I felt uncomfortable trying to go around it. It's fine, I'll wait. Well, a car coming the other way decides to try and maneuver around us both. He can't get around me. By this point, there's another truck waiting behind me, so I can't back up. The guy trying to get around me tells me to back up, but I can't, so I tell him to back up. He refuses, so I just sit there and can't stand up. Out of nowhere, I see a guy rush at my car on what must have been PCP, with a homemade wooden sword and nunchucks, eyes bulging from his head, hitting my windshield, telling me to back up my car so the guy can go through. I can't back up, but wouldn't try to fight this guy even if I did have a weapon of my own. He's clearly killed before with no remorse, and all of his neighbors went inside so they weren't a witness to anything that this guy was about to do. Turns out he's a heroin dealer that was mad. So many cars were pulling up on his block and hurting his business. So the crazy crack fiend with the bamboo locking sword, let's never meet again, and I sure as hell won't be going back there. Today I was on my way home. I was about 1 mile from my apartment, cruising with my windows down, smoking a cigarette and listening to some Kendrick Lamar. I noticed to my right was a white car that had sped up to be next to me, but I didn't think too much of it. As I approached where I would usually turn left into my complex, I decided based on their behavior this wasn't the best idea. At this point, I still had not looked at the driver or looked over to acknowledge them. I continued past my usual turn and got to the next light, where again they pulled up next to me. I heard a girl's voice, so I assumed it was some girl, just talking amongst themselves, trying to keep up with me. After the light turned green, I started speeding up to a max of 80 to 85 down a residential road, with only their car and my own. The car was neck to neck with me the entire time, not trying to race, not trying to overtake me or anything, but completely matching my speed. I think, okay, this is fun, because I'm going fast with a stranger. It's cool to experience it. But once again I became wary when we approached the next light, and I decided to turn left to basically circle back to my house, thinking they'd had their fun and I had obliged long enough, that she'd been next to me or following me for at least 10 miles at this point. They immediately switched 2 lanes over to get behind me. I turn left and speed up once again, and they once again match my speed exactly. I still have not looked at the driver at this point and want to get into the furthest left lane to be able to turn down the street towards my house, but she was directly next to me so I couldn't get over. We approached the lights and it's red. I slow to a stop and still don't look over. Pulling a drag from my cigarette and looking for a song to pick, I suddenly hear a girl's voice ask, "Where'd you get your glasses?" It's at this moment I decide to look over and see a single driver, a girl, most likely in her mid-20s, early 30s. The first thing I notice about her is a wide-eyed stare. If you've ever seen a psychotic break in a person or drug addict-induced psychosis, you'd be able to know what I'm talking about. I went to college for psychology, so that plays a little bit into my decision of making this as well. I also noticed that her back windows were completely tinted. It was a pretty nice car. That also means she has access to money. After I made those assessments, I responded, "Over there at the Vista station," or whatever it was, and she replies, "Oh," and is still staring at me. Then she asks, "Are you from here?" "No, I've been here for a while, but I'm not from Alaska." The next question she asked is really what put me into suspicious and alert mode. "Oh, so you have a lot of friends?" Actually, she made it more of a statement, not a question. Still wide-eyed. At this point, I'm sort of like, all right. But then she asks, "So what do you do for fun?" Well, I mean, I go to concerts. But this question weirded me out too, because it's like, it's been a pandemic. What I do for fun now isn't the same. "Oh, okay," she replies and just stares at me. Then I wait for her to continue or something, and then I decide to ask, "How about you?" She replies, "Oh, I don't really do anything. I've never been to a concert." Right. At this point, the light finally turns green, and I think that's the end of it, to suddenly hear, "You're really sexy." Now here's the thing. I'm not one to take compliments well, so I awkwardly reply, "Thanks." And then she asks if we want to exchange numbers while we're driving, and she's still screaming, matching my speed. I hesitate for a moment, but for the sake of the experience in this story, I say sure. She says, "Okay," and I pull forward and she pulls behind me. I drove about 2 miles before reaching the point basically where she had started following me in the first place. I pull into another little neighborhood that has an office and a parking area in front. I purposefully park in a spot so that she can pull up next to me and tell me her number on my left side. She then pulls into a spot basically 2 spots away to the right of me. Weird, I thought. It's about 5:50 or 6, pretty dark out, and I roll down my passenger side window. She rolls down her window and is staring at me and goes, "What?" I didn't say anything. "So, do you want my number?" She stares at me, thinking, and then goes, "You just take my number." I pull out my phone and I look at her and say, "Go ahead." She stares at me and she says, "1 second," and then reaches around for a maximum of 4 seconds before she sticks her hand out the window with a piece of paper. "Come here," she says with the first smile she's had the whole time. "Why? What's up?" "Come here," she says, still smiling, waving the paper. At this moment, I notice one hand is out the window waving the paper, while the other appears to be reaching into the door compartment below the window. Looking at her, I say, "I don't know. Can I trust you?" "I mean, I don't see why not," she says with this look of total fake shock that I would say that. "I don't know. I don't know you at all." Now this might not sound like I'm overthinking things, but based on her facial reactions or lack thereof, I don't feel like she was hurt that I was weirded out, and that's a bit weird. At this moment I say, "Sorry, I watch too many YouTube videos because it's true. For the past 5 months I've been obsessed with interrogation videos and other criminal investigations," and she just says, "Okay, just give me your number." "Are you ready?" I say. She stares at me. I start listing it off, and she stares at me again. After I'm finished, her stare continues. "Oh, and my name is Jack." "Jack?" she repeats. "Yeah." She waves the paper again. "You don't want it?" "No, just text me and I'll have your number." She stares at me. "Okay." I then say goodnight, that I have to go, and she starts her car back up and basically pulls up behind me, stopping for no reason. I notice she's looking at my directions as I peek at my driver's side rearview mirror. I then start to reverse so she knows that I'm not sticking around and pulls out the way. I head home, park, and make sure no one followed me, and head up to my home. I don't know who or what was behind those tinted windows, and I don't know why she wanted me to come over there to get her number in 2020. Sketch. I don't know why she made the statement about me having a lot of friends. I mean, I can speculate, but either way, I think if I had made the wrong decision tonight, I could have ended up dead or somewhere I didn't want to be. I was 10 at the time, and was visiting my hometown, Ecuador, for the summer. At the time, I knew just about everyone in my small town, Alausi, and so did my parents, which is why they let me go out on my own that day. Back to when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit of my hometown in Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out about our whole stay. One day my mum and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding, when I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay home, alone, during the duration of the wedding. But I saw that it was a beautiful day outside and asked my mum and dad if I could go to the park, as it was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out, and there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I argued until they finally gave in. They said that I could go to the park, as long as I was back before it got dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there, and I was ready to make new friends and play around. But oddly enough, there was no one there. It looked abandoned, which was weird, seeing how this was one of the 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid it no mind. I believe I ran over to a swing set or slide and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of a gate and motioning me to get closer. Behind him was a white van, which I had noticed before, but just thought it was a delivery truck of sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me in Spanish, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him, and he gave me that clown frown, and then said, "Well then, let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car, and by looking inside I saw that there were only 2 boxes, though I wasn't sure what they were filled with, and that was it. No seats, no posters, just those 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it, and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end of it, and blew till the balloon was fully inflated. He tied the end, and started to form a balloon into the shape of a dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned for me to come closer, to which I complied, and handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like it?" I nodded yes this time and gave him a small smile, and he then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that even as a kid, I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks, I would have to get into the trunk. I told him the exit was on the other side of the park, and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said a few words that still haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer, and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck. Come on, kid." While saying all of this, he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger, as though he were annoyed by this. He placed his hands on his hips and said, "Oh, but we're having so much fun." Right when he said that, I heard a voice on the other side of the park yelling, Son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown and just ran to the man and gave him a hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained," to which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around, I was able to hear this man murmur, "Sick creep." I looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" He gave me a sign and explained everything. As it turns out, he was not a real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids all across Ecuador. He would lure children with the clown costume and take them away to God knows where. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town, which is why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to save me. As he told me this, he also dialed for the police to report the incident. We had finally arrived at my house and the man said, "Be careful who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they seem." I gave him one final hug, gave him a thanks for saving me, and he gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay, boy. Now hurry in. I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran into the house. No one was there, and by the time they had returned, I decided not to tell anyone since I knew they'd flip out. It took a while to forget about the whole incident, especially with those words that kept reminding me of him. But I soon forgot, till I came across this page, and memories of that clown flooded my head. I'm not quite sure what happened to the sicko, but hopefully he is now behind bars. So, to that creepy clown from long ago, let's not meet again. I used to work in a carousel at a shopping mall in France. It was the 3rd biggest in Europe, so rather large. The first time I worked there, as it was owned by my parents, I was 13, and not really used to Parisian life. I came from a small town in the south, so it was really weird for me to be here. But one day a guy, between 20 and 30, was sitting on a bench and looking at me. He seemed quite nice, and at first I thought he was a parent or something looking at his child. He was completely alone and only looking at me. I awkwardly smiled and said, "Hello," thinking he needed some help. He kept smiling, and that's when I started to get scared. But I kept doing my work, looking at another bench to make him understand that I was uncomfortable. 5 minutes later he moved, sitting on the bench that I was looking at. He wasn't really smiling, and looked kind of disappointed. So I started looking up, because people could look at the carousel from there. When I looked down again 10 minutes later, the guy was gone. I thought he left, but he was still looking at me from the 1st floor. with that horrible smile. He stood there for a whole hour and continued changing so I would notice him. When I left work, he followed me, so I told my coworker to accompany me until I got home. That was a real creep. He came back in on random days and did the same thing, but now it's been at least 6 months and I haven't seen him. Last year I also had a pause and decided to go to the nearest bookshop, and as I did, I found a book that I really wanted to get, a Tolkien book. There was a guy there who looked at me and made a Tolkien reference. I laughed and just left. 20 minutes later, the same guy was on a bench next to me at the carousel and looked at me and smiled. And he came to see me and asked for my number. I said I didn't give it out to strangers, but he kept insisting. Then I asked him his number and told him that I'd text him when I was done with work, but of course never did. He came back 2 days after, but I didn't see him. I noticed him following me when I was in the same bookshop. I was moving randomly to see if he was really following me. He was. So I walked towards him and asked why he kept doing this. He then said he was in love with me, that I reminded him of his ex-girlfriend and that he wanted to get to know me. I said I was in a relationship, and he said it was okay. He could be a third wheel. That I could just text him whenever I felt like it. Maybe a month after that, I was going to a big convention where I was cosplaying as a random maid. I was holding a free hugs cardboard with some random drawings on it, and with 2 friends, and we were having a ton of fun. When out of nowhere, someone jumps up and hugs me. It was this dude. We called security and he kept screaming that I was the love of his life and that he would end his own life if he couldn't be with me. Apparently he asked my coworker why I wasn't there, and she thought he was a friend of mine and said that I was going to a convention. He came to search for me. I never saw him after that, and then I blocked his number. The final story happened in December of 2018. I had 2 jobs but in the same mall. A guy of about 20 to 30 with long hair was sitting on a bench next to the carousel and kept on looking at me. He sat there all day. Who does that? And I noticed that he was sometimes raising his phone and moving it in my direction, almost as if he were taking pictures of me or filming me. I was 15. You're not supposed to take pictures of minors. Plus, the way he looked at me was very strange, and I even caught him licking his lips while looking at me. I felt really uncomfortable, but kept on working and said nothing. The next day, I was working my other job, which was another carousel, and was only here for the Christmas holidays. I didn't see him, but when I left my job and was waiting for my parents to get ready so that we could go home, the guy sat next to me really close and asked for my number. I said no, and he looked down, very disappointed, and asked if I was working tomorrow. I asked, "I don't know. Why'd you ask?" "'Cause I like your body." He then stood up and left. I really didn't want to go to work the next day, so I told my coworker Lionel, another coworker, about what happened. I could hardly sleep that night. Was really paranoid about everything around me. Then I saw the guy and told Lionel to ask him to stop following me like that. He came back with a huge smile, saying, and I'm not kidding by the way, "It's okay. You 2 will go on a date." Apparently the guy told my coworker that he was a friend of mine and was messing with me. He said he was really shy in playing this game, so he would have this confidence to ask me on a date. I felt so strange, as if I was going to fall. I stopped working that afternoon and told my parents. They told me to stay with them and immediately tell me if I saw the guy again. As we were leaving, I swear, I saw the guy with a hoodie under the rain. The next day, I was with another coworker and saw the guy on the bench next to the carousel. When I told her, she ran towards him and yelled at him stuff that I couldn't hear, but I could see the guy's face and it was priceless. She returned with a big smile and the guy left me alone forever. Apparently she said that she knows where he lives, and if he saw him around, she will blow his brains out. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again. In any case, 3 creepers. Let's not meet. One night I decided I was going to take my mum's brand new car to go get my boyfriend. She was fine with me taking it because my car was blocked in. It was a nice summer night, so I was driving with the windows down. A little bit of background on how my boyfriend's section entrance is set up. When you pull in, there's an intersection right away. The road that you use to pull in on has a stop sign about 20 feet after you pull in. On the same road, just the other side, also has a stop sign for outgoing traffic. The road that crosses the ones you pull in on doesn't have any stop signs. My boyfriend's road is the first one, so when I pull in, I stop and have to make a left, and his house isn't far from it. It's basically A+ with north and south having stop signs, and east and west not. I pull in, stop at the stop sign, and there's a white Ford work van outside of the very first house to my left. I waited for him to go for about 2 minutes and he wasn't moving. I figure he was waiting for someone to come out the house, so I slowly go up to make the left turn. And I turn, past the van slowly, and because it was tight, I squeezed. When I'm passing at him, he yells, "Hey!" And that absolutely scared the crap out of me. So I quickly get to my boyfriend's house and have to parallel park because his driveway is taken up. Where I'm parked is across the street from his house, and once I'm parked, I immediately lock my doors and pull up my windows. I can see the van driver from the side mirror parked where he was. My boyfriend was outside working on his car, and I immediately call him because I was freaking out and didn't know if the guy was going to come around and try and take me or something. As the phone's ringing, I look in the mirror and see the brake lights go on. Then the guy starts reversing down the road at 50 miles an hour. This road has cars parked on both sides, and I watched him come up the street, and in my head I was like, don't hit my car, I can't get this car fixed. Thankfully he doesn't hit anyone, but he stops outside my car. By this time my boyfriend is right in front of my car and he goes up to the guy's window. This was the conversation. "You okay? Need any help, mate?" You lost? You need directions? Anywhere I can help you?" He doesn't say a word. My boyfriend steps back. The guy was in park, but he was hitting the gas pretty hard, so the engine was roaring. Then it seemed like he tried to shift either into drive or reverse, but he ends up staying in park and revs the van 3 more times. He finally shifts in reverse and flies backwards, only to pull over and park on the side of the street I'm parked on. I told my boyfriend I don't know what in the hell was happening, and he said to run inside and tell his mum and sister to lock the doors. That's exactly what we did. He was on the phone with the cops as well as his sister. His mum called his brother and told him what was going on, as he lives less than a minute's drive away. This is what I witnessed when I was watching outside the window. The drunk guy gets out of his van but is still running, and the driver's door is left open. He walks around my boyfriend's truck, pulls on the handle like he's trying to get in, then walks around again, then pats the truck's driver's side fender like it's a good dog, then walks back to his van, tries to get in through the passenger side, but I think it was locked since the door wouldn't open. And my boyfriend's brother comes round and screams at him. He must have scared him because the guy ran into his van and drove off right away. We all went outside and asked my boyfriend what he thought was going on, and he told me that when he asked the guy if he needed help, the guy wasn't making coherent sentences and seemed to be extremely intoxicated. He also said he thought the guy was attempting to break into his truck. This whole thing lasted about 20 minutes, and for the final 10, my boyfriend was on the phone with the cops, telling them the guy was doing some weird stuff and that he was drunk, and the cops said that there were 3 guys on the way but never showed up. A few minutes later, there was this family walking their dog and asked if we saw the crazy guy. They said that they saw him hitting cars that were parked, and apparently he crashed into a pole but reversed like nothing happened. My boyfriend later told me that the guy was speeding through his section at 90 miles an hour, and he went around it about 3 times. He had stopped outside of that one house, and that's when I pulled in and everything started. The guy never came back for the rest of the night at least. I looked on the local news sites and couldn't see anything about him, so I guess he got away with it. Weird, creepy drunk dude. "3 years ago, my wife and I purchased our first house, located in what is known as the wealthy area of the city. We wanted to buy our home somewhere nearby my mother's house, as she has lived alone since the death of my father. My mother was born in South Africa before the polio vaccine was available, and she was one of the many to be affected by the disease. She's paralyzed from the waist down and has spent her whole life on crutches or in a wheelchair. That being said, my wife and I wanted to purchase a house nearby so that we would be able to visit often and make sure she feels cared for, as well as having her independence respected. We found the perfect place within a 5-minute drive from her house. I always worried about something happening to her, so I felt comfort knowing I would be able to quickly head over to her place to help, no matter how minor or severe the problem. However, I was never prepared for what happened one night in the summer of 2019. I found myself facing my biggest fears and having my courage tested. In the midsummer, I dropped off my mother at the airport so that she could fly to South Africa to spend time with her sister and my cousins. Since my oldest brother lives in another city, and I lived so close, I naturally took on the responsibility of caring for her home while she was away. I visited it twice a week, making sure to water the plants, get the mail, check the answering machine, and all the other mundane tasks that come with owning a home. Luckily, the year prior, I had a security system installed within our home that gave me remote access and viewing of the property. This system would alert my phone that I kept at my side at all times of any activity in the house. If a window was opened, one of the entrance doors was opened, any alarm was triggered, I would know about it. It gave my mother, my wife, and my brother and I peace of mind, knowing that she sat in what we considered a fortress of safety. The only thing I didn't have installed in her home was security cameras, which I would come to rip myself apart over later in the story. My own home has cameras inside and outside, watching everything from my motorbike in the garage to my sleeping dog in the living room. For some reason, I never thought to put something like that on the outside of my mother's house. Maybe it would be a bit much and an invasion of privacy. On the other hand, she and I would always know who was at her door and who was around her house. Fast forward a month, my mother is enjoying her time away and things are going well at home. It was a weekday night when I came home from work, went to the gym, watched a movie with the wife, and got ready for bed. Sounds like a normal night so far, doesn't it? Well, just past 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone starts making the sound when it receives a notification from an app. I ignored this, thinking it was an email or Instagram notification, and tried to go back to sleep, as I average 5 hours of sleep a night and value it dearly. Shortly after dozing off, my phone goes off again, and again, and again. My wife rolls over and says, "Turn it off, I'm trying to sleep." She always gives me crap about my volume being on at night, but I do it in case of an emergency or if my mother is trying to reach us. Thank God I left the volume up, because when I started to roll over to close the notifications I received, it hit me as suddenly as a car crashing through my living room. I had a series of notifications from the security system installed in my mother's house. Just then, the company who monitors the system calls my phone and I answer. The lady on the phone informs me that the home alarm is going off and the motion detector in the basement has picked up several time-stamped instances of movement. She informed me that they dispatched a security patrol to my mother's house to check. With the lady still on the phone, I looked at the notification from the security system and saw what she was telling me. I checked the status of her door locks and the system said all doors were indeed secured. Without looking any further, it hit me. Someone or something is inside the house right now. Keep in mind, I was abruptly woken up from sleep and was told my mother's house may possibly being broken into. I hadn't had the chance to shake off the mind fog yet, and therefore I came to the incorrect conclusion that my mother was in danger. I jumped out of bed and sprinted to the garage, only stopping to slide on my shoes and grab the keys to my car. Luckily, I had my pajama pants on, because it was a chilly night. I didn't stop to grab a shirt, jacket, or any type of weapon at all, in my rush to get to my mother's place. Fortunately, I kept a heavy-duty flashlight in my car, similar to what policemen carry that I use for urban exploring. I put the flashlight on my lap, put the car in drive, and put the pedal to the floor. I nearly tripled the posted residential speed limit in my haste to reach the house. Let me tell you, nothing wakes you up more than trying to drive like you belong in the Fast and Furious crew. I reached my mum's house and noticed that all the lights were off, as I'd left them. The alarm was going off and it was insanely loud. Neighbors were starting to come outside, but no security patrol cars were in sight. My car is also super loud, and it has an aftermarket exhaust system installed, so I was convinced that whoever was inside the house had to have heard me come flying into the cul-de-sac. I grabbed the flashlight in my hand and ran to the front door while unlocking it from my phone. I ripped the door open and found myself staring into the dark entryway of my mother's house, and I'm ashamed to say, I was frozen solid as ice. I was terrified. Being 25 years old at the time, I'd never faced anything so daunting before. I've been through a fair amount of intense and wild situations in the past, some which have put my life in danger, but nothing scared me more than staring into what I was convinced was the doorway to unimaginable horrors committed in my childhood home. Keep in mind at this point, standing in the doorstep, my brain had still not sent me into the calming reminder that my mother was actually still relaxing at my aunt's beach house in South Africa, and was not inside the darkness I was currently staring into. With the image of my mother in my mind, my courage was slammed into place. One iron bolt at a time, I entered the house. I would like to say that I slowly and methodically searched the house one cupboard at a time, starting with my mother's room with the backup of the security patrol with me. But instead, I thundered into the basement like a missile locking onto its target, because this was where the motion detector was triggered multiple times. I guess my fight or flight reflex absolutely pulverized the button that sends me into flight mode, because I went on the hunt instead of checking on my mother's room. I quite literally punched the switch that turns on the lights in the basement and braced myself for a fight to the death. To this day, I'm not sure if it was my relief or my horror that I saw absolutely nothing. Not a damn thing. I looked around where I stood. The windows in the main area of the basement were intact. The motion detector lights were flashing its lights and notifying my phone of my own movement in the house. The thought came to me that only an idiot would be standing out in the open in the basement. So I ran back upstairs and into the kitchen, turned on all the lights as I passed. Once I had the biggest knife from the kitchen block in the kitchen, I made my way to my mother's room, slowly and methodically checking every corner, doorway, closet, and under every piece of furniture I could until I was sure the main floor of the house was secure. The intruder had to be in the basement. I was sure of it. I pulled out my phone and silenced the home alarm so that I could listen for any type of sound. I made my way down the steps as quietly as possible, knife in hand, gripped so tight it was making my knuckles crackle and pop. I checked the main room again, under the pool table, behind the couch, and then the bathroom. Nothing. I checked the first bedroom and found nothing. I turned to go down the hallway and felt my heart try to tear out my chest when I saw that the door to the guest bedroom was closed. I couldn't for the life of me remember if I had closed it before or during a prior visit. I slowly walked up to the door, trying my best to listen to any sound, but all I could hear was my heart pounding in my chest as if I was standing directly on the San Andreas fault during a big one. I took hold of the door handle and ripped it open. I cannot confirm or deny the possibility that I crapped my pants when I saw the figure standing at the other end of the room, catching the image of a giant knife in their hand. I had to give 110% in my effort in order not to faint at the sight I saw in front of me. I was beyond terrified. It was now or never. I wielded my resolve back together, one steel plate at a time, and reached for the light switch as I could fight the intruder to their death. The light came on, and I dropped to my knees in tears. I was staring face to face with my own reflection. The closet door in the bedroom was sliding mirrors, and in the dark they displayed what looked like a serial killer to me. I opened the closet door and full-on started crying in relief as I found nothing. I heard the car door close outside and figured it was the patrol car arriving on the driveway. I walked down the hall and past another set of sliding mirrors that led to a storage area, a hot water tank, and the furnace of the house. I stopped just as I passed the sliding mirror, as the same intense shock of fear came rushing back when I realized I didn't check that room. I turned and put my hand on the mirror to slide it, and again found myself frozen. Have you ever found yourself in a situation that intense and wild, that all you could do was make nonsensical noises? Through tears, maniacal giggling, and the use of every curse word available, I slid the mirror aside and stepped into the storage area. But it too was empty. I turned and sprinted with all my might upstairs and outside onto the driveway, where the patrol car was parked. The so-called security officer standing there must have been younger than I was. If you picture the word intimidating in your mind, this man was the opposite. He was chubby, smiling, and had a mega baby face. He looked like he was there to greet you as you entered the house. I checked my watch and the man had arrived a full hour after I told the security company dispatch to patrol. I'm not normally someone who bashes someone who's a professional that involves risk and danger, but I couldn't believe how long it took them to get there. I started laughing like a loon when this guy asked me if everything was okay. Maybe the intensity of the situation I just came out of caused me to lose it. I explained to the guy I checked every crack and crevice of the house and found nothing, no thanks to him. I started to doubt and had moronic and rude thoughts of questioning the usefulness of this pretend security officer that I am admittedly ashamed of, until this guy asked me if I'd checked the garage. My smart ass grin disappeared instantly as I grabbed for the garage door opener in my car and pressed the button to raise the door. Slowly it opened to make myself feel like a bigger ass. I found myself standing behind the security officer as it did. The garage is very clean and well organized. I take pride in the fact that when you open the door, everything is in sight. The space is open and it's virtually impossible to hide in. I walked through it, peeking inside the car and then leaving the garage satisfied that it was empty. The security officer gave me some paperwork to sign, basically saying that he did in fact respond to the home alarm being triggered. I brought it to his attention that the basement motion detector had multiple timestamps where it recorded movement, and I got worried as we watched his face turn pale. He informed me that the detectors used by the company don't rely on movement, but monitors changes in temperature in the room to reduce false reports of movement. He told me that if a person moves in front of the sensor, the thermal signature from their body and the movement of said thermal signature together disrupts the reading of the room and triggers the notification I received on my phone. With that information dropped on my lap, he got into his car and left. I locked the house up, left the outside lights on and rearmed the security system. I leaned against my car, staring at the house, wondering how in the world the alarm could have triggered, seeing as it's based on movement and heat, without someone being present. Then again, maybe someone was. I'll never know. Just before I left, I verified the status of the specific sensor that was triggered on the security system console, and it showed that it was operating correctly. The very next day I had security cameras installed on the outside of the house in the garage, and in the area where the motion detectors were located. It has been 2 years since this event, and I still haven't told my mother, brother, or wife about what went down. Was there really someone there? Or was there a supernatural reason behind the alarm being triggered? I hope that I never go through that again. Sometimes it's best not to find out the answer. This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old female and I finally bought a car for myself. I love driving around and listening to music alone or with my siblings. This very night it was around 7 p.m, wintertime, and I took my 2 siblings, 18-year-old female and 13-year-old male, out for a drive after their consistent pleading because they were bored. Now I'm a smoker, and coming from a South Asian household, women aren't meant to smoke, so I took the opportunity to smoke without worrying that my parents could catch me. The city I live in has a good side and a bad side, and I lived in the very good side, or so I thought. A quiet suburban area. I didn't hesitate to park somewhere, get out and smoke for a while leaning against my car, as I don't like smoking in my own car, and scrolling away on my phone. I parked underneath a lamppost and got out and lit my cig, and all was well. It was dark, but I wasn't scared as I visited that road regularly, and it wasn't too far from my aunt's house. As I lit up, I looked up from my phone and looked around to see a man walk out of the shadows from a bush. I didn't think anything of it. I see people going for walks all the time around here. He was at least 6'4", was on the opposite sidewalk, and I assumed he was just going to carry on walking, so I carried on looking at my phone, until I look up to see him just standing there, fully facing me and watching me. My sister in the car must have been watching him too, and knocked on the window, telling me to come in. I had already butted out my cigarette, and was making my way to my car door, keys in hand, and the guy was still standing there completely still. I got in anyway, locked my door, and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking perhaps I was just overreacting. I put my key in the ignition, and I turned to see where the guy was, and I see that he's now behind my car, taking pictures of my car and my registration number. I rolled my window down the tiniest bit, and I could see his face a little clearer. He was of Indian descent, with a beard and hoodie over his head, showing some features on his face. I asked politely what he was doing, and he came towards my window but stood a bit of a gap away. In the most aggressive tone he said, "Do you know who I am?" No. I didn't know whether it was rhetorical or not. "I have a lot of stuff going on in my house and I don't need you here parking here watching me. You look real suspicious randomly parking here with your friends. Get the hell out of there. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I nervously chuckled to myself, trying to keep calm, but my anxiety was already halfway through the roof at this point. I didn't understand how I looked in any way threatening, as I'm a small girl who's been told I look like a kid. I was in my pajamas and clearly minding my own business. "Look, I just parked here to smoke. I come here all the time and live nearby." He got right up to my window, slid his fingers through the gap, and forced my window all the way down, screaming at the top of his lungs for me to get the hell out of here. I screamed in terror and told him to stop swearing as I had a minor in the car, and he was scaring him. I don't know why, I knew he wouldn't exactly care. He screamed and went red. "If you don't get out of here now, I'll damage you in your car." My adrenaline was already hitting peak, so I was terrified, didn't even bother putting my seatbelt on, and jolted out of there in a panic. I went straight ahead at a junction leading me to a dead end, but I took that opportunity to just calm down. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline. I couldn't even keep my foot on the clutch. My sister was quickly asking me if I was okay. Before I could even answer, I see a pair of headlights zooming towards me. It was the guy, going at least 50 miles an hour on a 20 miles per hour road. He nearly crashed into my car, but by some miracle he didn't. He jumped out the car, and this is when I realized my window was still all the way down from when he forced it down. I wanted to cry, and I quickly tried to shut my window, but he was too fast. He half threw his body into my car, through my window, and I screamed so loudly, with his ear right next to my face, I'm sure I deafened him. He was trying to steal my car keys from the ignition. I thanked my lucky stars that with my car, in order to get the car keys out, I would have had to have had my foot on the clutch, which I didn't. With one hand, I was pressing down on the horn of my car to make as much noise as possible to alert the people in their houses, and with the other, scratched his hands away from my car keys, and my poor siblings were in the car bawling their eyes out. My little brother had no idea what he could do to protect me, and my sister was in the passenger seat experiencing all of this in front of her eyes. I hurt the guy enough for him to get out of my damn car. "I told you to get out of here or I'll hurt you. I told you." The guy attempted to pull up my door handle, trying to open it and get in, and then I noped out of there. I didn't care that my body was half shaking like a fish out of water. My main priority was now the safety of my siblings and myself. I knew that we were making a loud commotion. I held onto the horn of my car trying to get the attention from other houses, but nobody helped. It was 7 p.m, and I was certain that people would hear me screaming, but they all acted oblivious. I managed to wriggle my way out of that dead end and went to a new street, and to a totally different area and parked. I knew this probably wasn't a good idea, but I knew the guy wasn't following me, as I drove around for a good 10 minutes. I just released my emotions, and me and my sister and little brother were just sitting there in the car sobbing away. This was the first time that anything like that had ever happened to me, or any of us. I rang the police and immediately wanted to punch myself in the face when the dispatcher asked if I got his registration. Of course, in my panic, I didn't. I wanted to slap myself in the face because I listened to these horror stories on YouTube all the time, and always felt they taught me how to handle certain situations, and I couldn't even bloody get a registration number. The dispatcher was amazingly empathetic, as was the female officer who called me the next day. As a woman, she understood how scary that must have been for me, and again I cried to her. Unfortunately, the cops informed me there were no CCTV cameras where it happened, so they couldn't really do much, especially with me not knowing where he came from. If he came from a house, and if so, which one, or his registration number. The female officer apologized to me, but it really was my fault for not mentally noting important information. They made a report of my attack, so if anything similar happened in the area, they can connect them. The officer said I most likely parked there, and he was doing something illegal and freaked out on me. I just think he was a freak who enjoyed scaring people, who looked like easy prey. So to the creep who tried to steal my car, let's not meet again. I'm a 37-year-old female, and this happened when I was about 11. I lived in a small brick house with my mum and younger brother. There were 2 bedrooms at one end of the house, which were mine and my brother's, with my mum's room being on the opposite end of the house. In my bedroom I had a bunk bed, and I always slept on the top bunk. I had a ceiling fan / light fixture, which had the metal pull cords, and I had tied a string from the one that turns the light on and off and attached that string to the top bunk so that I could turn my light on and off once I'd climbed up to go to bed. So one night I'd stayed up later than I was supposed to, because I had called in a song request to a radio station and had been waiting on them to play the song so I could record it onto a cassette tape. Yes, I'm that old. They had finally played it and I successfully recorded it, so I climbed out of bed, got comfortable, and then grabbed my string, pulled it, turning off the light. About 5 seconds after turning it off, my room was filled with a blue light. I opened my eyes for a second and scanned the room, and when I saw where the light was coming from, my blood ran cold. There was a Native American man in full Native American clothing standing in the center of my room with his arms crossed, with a bright blue aura, and he was just staring at me. I tried to scream, but didn't seem to be able to move or scream for what felt like an eternity. I was finally able to scream, and once I did, I was able to grab my string and turn the light back on. With that, he vanished. I told my mum it was a bad dream, because she's definitely a non-believer in anything paranormal, and I slept with the light on that night. The next day, my younger brother asked about what had happened, and I told him what I had seen. He proceeds to tell me he'd seen the exact same thing about a week before my experience, but he told me not to be scared. He said he believed the man was protecting us. Well, I'm 37 now, and had almost forgotten the incident, until just recently. I was listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Story podcast episode 12, and there was a story by an anonymous listener from San Diego who'd seen the exact same man, only his was holding a hatchet. I'm in Tennessee, the opposite side of the country from the anonymous listener. As soon as I heard the story, I began shaking and crying, and now I'm curious. Has anyone else seen him? This happened around 2016. Back then, me and my buddies were doing some traveling across Central and South America. While we were doing some long deserted highway, my friend and I start to get really thirsty and look on the GPS to see where the nearest town is. We were dying for a soda. It was really hot and our air conditioning left a lot to be desired. We see the nearest town is about 10 minutes away. As we're approaching, we can't see the road, but my friend points a little single dirt road offshooting from the highway. So we take it. It's very bumpy as we drive off, and we get to this tiny rundown town in the middle of nowhere. It has about 3 shops, I think, all next to each other. But the people look friendly and amicable, so I tell him that I'll be right back to leave the aircon running to cool down the vehicle and that I would get the drinks. I go in, get the drinks and pay. I should probably mention at this point, I had just taken out a fat load of bills from the bank account in the last city. And when I open my wallet to pay, the cashier's eyes widen significantly. And by cashier, I mean someone with a piece of paper and a calculator. There was no cash register. I grab my drinks and make my way back to the car, but feel all eyes on me from the 4 people that were in the shop at the time. I jump back in, talk to my friend before peeling off and having a good long swig of Coke. We're back on the road, and after about 15 minutes, 5 cars pull up behind us, matching our speed. At this point we start freaking out. Who the hell are they and what do they want? For a moment I thought it was police, but check my mirrors and it clearly isn't. These cars look run down as hell, and our car was relatively new, and I was convinced that if we got faster we could definitely outrun them. So I started putting my foot on the accelerator, pushing 80, pushing 90, pushing 100, and these guys were matching speed adamantly. I could hear their engines roar, and it was clear that if they went any faster I'm sure their engine would explode. But I carried on pursuing the speed. Just as I was hitting 110, do I see lights up ahead of me, and it's the police. I praise whatever higher power there is up there, slow down and stop right in front of them, and the cars in front of me just pile on, going quicker than before, and the police take no notice. I speak to the female officer and ask her why she didn't stop those cars, and she said because I'd pulled over first. Gee, thanks. I explained the situation to her, and she wanted to know why I was speeding. I give her a quizzical look and explain again that I was being chased by 5 goons in cars. She kind of bats the complaint away and asks what I did wrong. I give her a weird look. And then I think back to the shop, and it all adds up. The people there must have seen the wad of cash and definitely wanted to stop me to take a piece of it. After explaining it to her, she's quite satisfied with the answer I gave, and says to be careful around these parts, and that desperate people will do desperate things for money. I sort of thank her half-heartedly and make my way, but she warns me not to speed again. Nice. We leave, and we weren't bothered by those people again, thankfully, but it did scare the crap out of me. We then stocked up on drinks after that to not have to make any unprecedented pit stops in rural, nowhere towns. It's about 6 o'clock on a Friday night, and I've just gotten off work at a bad part of town. I'm driving northbound on a 2-lane street when I reach the part where a freeway off-ramp merges into my lane. I'm driving in the left-hand lane when I see a black Mazda sitting at the stop sign waiting to merge. He starts to roll forwards, and before I've even passed him, and I'm thinking he doesn't see me because of the sun or whatever, I'm getting closer, and he's still rolling it down, so I give 2 short honks, nothing drawn out or excessive, to just politely beep him and let him know that I'm there, and that I'm not planning on spending my Friday night in a car wreck. He keeps rolling, not even slowing down, so I simply drift halfway into the lane to my right, and checking my mirrors beforehand, and go around the front of his car. I'm slightly annoyed, but no big deal. Let's just get home. I get maybe less than 100 feet down the road when I hear someone yell something like, You think you're the police or something? I look to my right, as my windows were rolled down because of a heat wave, and I see him along with me on his windows rolled down too. He's angry, Hispanic, and tattered up. He's wearing a wife beater, and he has a shaved head. So I'm thinking he's a gangbanger because gangs are rampant in this part of town. He continues to ask if I think I'm a cop, and I say I don't want an accident. I know it doesn't make sense, that's just what came out. We repeat our cop/accident line a few times, where he does something that scares me crapless. He takes his right hand off the steering wheel and reaches towards his waist, and I immediately think, this guy's packing heat. I don't know if he actually has a gun, because I can't see his hand and I don't really want to find out either. I start pulling back because I'm not about to give him a clean shot. It's a good thing too because he starts driving into my lane, but it's a slow enough drift that I'm not sure he's trying to run me off the road. Either way, I've pulled back far enough that he swerves into my lane and misses the front of my car. He swerves back into the right-hand lane and starts to slow down too. Since I started decelerating earlier, we're both slowing down, but I'm still putting a distance between our cars. The second, scared crapless moment occurs when he slows to a complete stop. I stop too because there's no way in hell I'm passing him. So he's there in the right-hand lane and I'm just sitting here in the left-hand lane, about 5 or 6 cars lengths behind him, and we're both just stopped in the middle of traffic. Cars are backed up behind me, and there's a stopped car to my right, and there's a concrete barrier between me and oncoming traffic. So this freaks me out because I feel completely boxed in. Nobody honks, nobody moves, we're all just waiting to see what this guy does. The adrenaline is pumping through me, and I see my options. 1, he gets out of his car, and I see a gun, and I'm ducking behind the dashboard, flooring it and running him down. 2, if he gets out of his car and I'm letting him get close, flooring it before he can get back to his car, and he better get out of the way or I'm running him down. 3, if he gets out of his car and just stands in the middle of the road like an idiot, I'll consider running him down just in case. Now, I'm not a violent person by nature, and I'm still shocked that I considered running down another human being as an acceptable option, but take in mind I was under a lot of pressure. So I'm sitting there in my car waiting for him to make his move. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably less than a minute before he starts moving again. He's driving well under the speed limit and I'm thinking he wants me to pass him, but I failed my first driving test for going too slow, and I can go slower than him. I'm probably driving at 20 in a 45 zone, and by the time we reach a traffic light he goes through, and I make sure I catch a red light. I pull into the next AM/PM because I'm still pretty rattled and grab a corn dog and wait for my hands to stop shaking before I head home. If we ever meet again, I better hope I'm behind the wheel, otherwise I'm out of options. As a kid growing up, I lived in a small town in western New York about an hour south of Rochester. Town name Naples. A friend and I were exploring his basement and we found a boarded up tunnel. Looked like a boarded up window. There was a cord of wood stacked in front of it. We finally got the boards off and discovered a hole that went about 30 feet under the house towards the road's main street. We asked his parents what it was, and they told us it was a link to the Underground Railroad that slaves used to escape to the north. Actually to Buffalo and then across to the Canadian border. We did some research at the town library, and from everything we could find it appeared to be true. I guess there was once a network of tunnels under the town, and this house was on top of one of those pathways.